Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, breaking news, a successful mission overnight to rescue that missing U.S. serviceman who ejected over Iran. President Trump revealing new details about the life or death mission as the deadline approaches for reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Plus, OPEC meets today to discuss the energy crisis in the Gulf, what can be done to keep oil and gas prices from skyrocketing.
And it's TMZ versus Capitol Hill, as the partial government shutdown drags on. The founder of a celebrity gossip site tells us why he's turning his attention to Washington.
We're showing how the public feels about them, and I think they've lost that big view of it.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, coming at you live from our world headquarters here in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
And I'm Joe Mathieu, in for David Gura alongside Lisa Mateo. It is Easter Sunday, the 5th of April, 2026. Thank you for spending part of your holiday with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Business app.
And we do have some good news on this holiday, and that is that downed pilot in Iran has been located. It was seemingly a harrowing mission. It involved him hiking through a crevasse. We found out just past midnight the pilot had been recovered. This involved a CIA counter mission where they're trying to distract Iranian forces, but it looks like he was recovered, and we'll have a lot more on that for you today.
Truly remarkable. The President of the United States late last night on Truth Social writing, "We got him." This is a story that we've been following for a couple of days, Christina, and what a pleasure to be able to greet our viewers and listeners on an Easter Sunday morning with good news.
Yes, I think a lot of people were on pins and needles. It was really unclear what was going to happen. So let's go to Lisa for the headlines.
You got it, and we'll pick up from there. Yeah, that crew member had been missing since Friday, and that's when Iran downed that fighter jet. It was an F-15 fighter jet. Let's get right to it in this post from President Donald Trump, that he said he called the airman a highly respected colonel, a brave warrior. He said he sustained injuries but will be just fine. Now, the New York Times reporting the rescue operation involved hundreds of special operation troops with U.S. aircraft dropping bombs and firing on Iranian convoys to keep them away from the airman's hiding area. The publication adding that he hid in a mountainside, may have relied on locals who were anti-regime. And on the other crew member on board that jet, it was reported to have been saved earlier. Now, the rescue comes as the war enters its sixth week, with Tehran continuing to attack its neighbors. Kuwait Petroleum said its headquarters caught fire after a strike by unmanned drones. The United Arab Emirates Defense Ministry said that its systems are actively engaging with missiles and drone threats. The Israeli military said it hit a petrochemical complex in southwestern Iran Saturday. Earlier this weekend, President Trump threatened to unleash, quote, all hell on Iran as early as Monday, saying that 10-day deadline for the country to make a peace deal with the U.S. was running out. The president has also warned that if Iran doesn't agree to his terms and open the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping traffic out of the Persian Gulf, the U.S. would bomb the country's civilian energy infrastructure. Iran announced Saturday that Iraq, a major oil producer, would be exempt from its shipping restrictions in the Strait, allowing as much as 3 million barrels a day of Iraqi oil cargoes. To the war in Ukraine, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he is ready to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. That's for negotiations to end the war between their countries.
We are ready to come. I always said that we are ready for the meeting on the level of leaders in any kind of format.
All right, Zelensky made those comments in Istanbul. That's after meeting with Turkey's president. And yes, it is Easter, and Pope Leo XIV, he is celebrating his first Easter vigil at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. It's his first Holy Week as leader of the Roman Catholic Church. We'll continue to bring you more on that as the Mass does continue throughout the morning. Christina and Joe.
Have you guys been to the Vatican?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I was there to cover the conclave, which was one of the more remarkable assignments. And I can only imagine seeing the pilgrims in the square this morning, the energy that they're all feeling right now.
It would be really cool. I went with Lincoln for just a regular Mass, and even that was pretty incredible.
Spectacular.
All right, let's get to the headlines. Just hours ago, as we mentioned, President Trump confirmed the second crew member of that F-15E aircraft that was shot down in Iran has been recovered.
Pretty amazing stuff here. Christina, this is like something out of a spy novel or an action movie or both. You can imagine the Netflix film being produced right now. The CIA ended up locating this individual, passing along the information to the Pentagon, which then unleashed a series of events that included SEAL Team 6, a group of commandos on the ground. And a downed pilot in this case that at one point hiked up a 7,000-foot ridgeline, according to the New York Times, managed to stay hidden with nothing but a firearm, a beacon, and a secure communication device.
The CIA also created a deception campaign. This is according to the New York Times. They basically made it look like they had him and were taking him out over land. Meanwhile, they were plucking him out by air. Then those aircrafts had a malfunction and they couldn't be flown out. So they had to blow them up, send in 2 others, but they did miraculously get everyone out.
That's for sure. And the president went way out of his way to make that point here. Look, it's been a couple of tough days for the administration after suggesting that Iran did not have this capability. We only see 2 planes down and a pilot missing. We got him, the president writes, my fellow Americans, over the past several hours. And this, by the way, was 9 minutes into Easter Sunday. It was 12:09 a.m. The United States military, he says, pulled off one of the most daring search and rescue operations in U.S. history. And he talks about the pilot. I'm thrilled to let you know he is now safe and sound. We're calling him a brave warrior, or her, depending on the ID that we learn, Christina. Behind enemy lines in the treacherous mountains of Iran, being hunted down by our enemies, he says, we're getting closer and closer by the hour, but was never truly alone, because his commander-in-chief, Secretary of War, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and fellow warfighters were monitoring his location 24 hours a day. What do you think the likelihood, Christina, is that this individual shows up in the Oval Office at some point this week?
I'd say better than not, and that might compromise any future Special Forces career he or she would like to have. But the tweet does go on. The president heavy on the keyboard this morning, but obviously
no doubt.
This is an exuberant moment. He said, at my direction, the U.S. military sent dozens of aircraft armed with the most lethal weapons in the world to retrieve him. He sustained injuries, but he will be just fine. This miraculous search and rescue operation comes in addition to a successful rescue of another brave pilot yesterday, which we did not confirm because we did not want to jeopardize our second rescue operation. This is the first time in military memory that 2 U.S. pilots have been rescued separately deep in enemy territory. We will never leave an American warfighter behind. We're still going. The fact that we were able to pull off both these operations without a single American killed or even wounded, not the case. The president just admitted that the pilot was injured, but even so, just proved once again that we have achieved our overwhelming air dominance and superiority over the Iranian skies. This is a moment that all Americans, Republicans, Democrat, and everyone else should be proud of and united around. We truly have the best, most professional and lethal military in the history of the world. God bless America, God bless our troops, and happy Easter to all. And I do think the president is right. This is a moment that Americans, no matter what their political leanings, no matter how they feel about this conflict, should take some joy in on this moment, because I cannot imagine how scary it is to be down behind enemy lines, even for these guys who've trained for this. This is not the situation. You take that training hoping you never, ever have to use it.
That's right. Of course, this is after successfully ejecting from a fast-moving fighter jet, which in itself can be a deadly procedure. So just amazing that we're telling this story this morning. And we're really lucky to have a couple of voices to help us explore all of this in Bloomberg's White House correspondent, Jeff Mason, waking up with us on Easter Sunday morning, and Bloomberg's Jerusalem reporter, Dan Williams. Gentlemen, it's great to see you both. And Jeff, I'm going to start with you and what you may or may not be hearing from the White House. The president obviously outlined all of this on Truth Social. Does this lift some of the political pressure that he was under?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wrote a story yesterday, which I was preparing to talk to you guys about today, about the political risks for the president of last week, saying that he was going to pull the United States out of the war in 2 to 3 weeks, and talking about all of the victories that he perceives the United States has had during that period since it and Israel attacked Iran, only to then on Friday be undercut by, have his rhetoric undercut anyway, by the fact that the Iran had successfully brought down a U.S. plane. And then to have one of the members of that crew not have been found on Friday or yet on Saturday. Huge political risk in addition to the military implications of that. So this is a big success story for the president. It absolutely lifts some of the political threats that come from it, but it also leads to more questions again about that timeline that he outlined last week, whether or not he ends up sticking to that, or whether he ends up going through with some of the more escalatory rhetoric that was also part of his speech on Wednesday night.
And Dan, I want to ask you about the messaging around this coming from Iran. Some of our Mideast colleagues were chatting with me at the early hours for us this morning, talking about how the Iranian government is focusing not on this amazing, successful rescue, but they're focusing on the fact that they were able to down this plane in the first place. They're also talking about the fact that the U.S. lost more aircraft going in and trying to retrieve them. What is the messaging? What messaging is piercing through there? And how do you think this is going to impact the conflict in the region? Because even though this is very good news, there were still strikes overnight throughout the region, hits on energy infrastructure. Israel hit, Iran says 5 people were killed and 170 wounded in an airstrike on this petrochemical complex. So this is a moment, but the war is still continuing around it.
Well, I think the Iranians are understandably trying to draw some cold comfort out of their failure to capture this airman and basically looking at the debris left behind. I'm not sure there's much to be gained from doing that. Perhaps for many Iranians, it's a reminder of the failed American attempt to rescue hostages back in 1979, an attempt that really sullied the record of then President Carter.
Yeah.
Back then, aircraft were abandoned, destroyed in the desert, but crew members were also killed. This is a very different situation. To our knowledge, no American personnel have been killed. Everyone's been safely withdrawn. So the Iranians are doing what they can. And frankly, I would wonder whether it's wise of them to point out to their own audience that apparently the American Rescue Party managed to set up in very short order a working base of operation, including a landing strip on Iranian soil, not least given suggestions by the Trump administration, sometimes by Israel, that there may be an attempt mounted by force to withdraw what remains of highly enriched uranium from Iran. By every account, that would require a major excavation campaign, some very heavy lifting of those canisters, 440 kilograms worth of canisters, potentially the erection or the creation of a landing strip, an air zone. So if anything, the Iranians are telling their own people that the Americans have capabilities that potentially, and I say potentially, could be reapplied in a major strategic operation to deny Iran that enriched uranium sometime in the future.
Jeff Mason, we want to talk about a different post that the president wrote yesterday before he got to the pilot. This is before we knew the pilot had been rescued. Remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal, he wrote, or open up the Hormuz Strait. Time is running out, 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them, R-E-I-G-N, rain down on them. Glory be to God. A statement that has generated the headline on the Drudge Report, Trump invokes holy war. Is this ultimatum still in place?
Well, I would say it's probably still in place until he tells us it's not. That said, my suspicion is, based on having covered President Trump for so long, that one of the things that generated that social media post yesterday was his frustration or a sense of being under pressure because of this airman who had not yet been captured. So we'll see if that changes the dynamic for the president. He will no doubt be feeling a rush of success from this operation now, and that may impact the next steps. But that doesn't mean that the impact will mean the president won't follow through on that threat. It again just generates a question of will he still be in the mood that he seemed to be at the beginning of last week of just wanting to get out in 2 to 3 weeks, or will he feel flushed by this military operation and success that, by the way, started out with a military failure of having a plane shot down, which contradicts the air superiority argument that he had been making, or will it? I guess that's just the question, Joe. Is what happens next in terms of whether the president wants to continue that escalation or not. But that's a long answer to your short question, and I'll circle back, which is, as far as I think we can tell, that threat is still there until he removes it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to go back to what you were talking about that airstrip, because AFP is reporting the U.S. used an unused or an outdated airstrip near Isfahan. There is a nuclear facility there. They don't seem to be, it's a large area. They don't seem to be in the same place. But you have information, I understand, on Israel's assistance to the rescue operation. Can you tell us what you've learned and how they were involved?
Well, as we were preparing for this interview, one media outlet reported that 2 Israeli commando units were involved in those recovery efforts. That hasn't been confirmed by Israeli officials. What Israel has says, and I think this is predictable and frankly acceptable and credible that they helped from the outset in terms of shifting resources, both in terms of offensive strikes aimed at suppressing potential threats, encroaching Iranian groups, Iranian capture parties, posses, and the like, trying to reach that airman, as well as intelligence. The Israelis, while of course the U.S. has a superpowers intelligence facilities, the Israelis are very good at tactical intelligence. That's why they've headed up assassination strikes. They have a way of closing the circle between detecting a target and sending the order to an aerial vehicle to shoot at that target, basically closing that loop very quickly. That's something that would be required in a hot pursuit situation, like recovering a downed airman who is being pursued in parallel by the Iranians. So I think it's credible. Whether there were actually Israeli boots on the ground, that remains to be seen. Perhaps we'll never know. It could be the Israelis are trying to gain some of the glory from what is an impressive story for Easter weekend. Nonetheless, there's no doubt that those allies are working very closely together, especially when it comes to air power, which is the main branch being used against Iran at this time.
Really fascinating, Dan.
And you're absolutely right. Nobody has on-the-ground intelligence about Iran better than the Israelis, and that had to be put to use at some point.
Absolutely, and this being a joint operation really changes the contours of this story, if that is confirmed. Hey, Jeff, I'm looking at the guidance for the president today. He's got executive time this morning, closed to press, and then the family Easter dinner at 7 p.m., which obviously is a private affair. Do we suspect he makes some time to talk about this today in front of cameras and microphones?
Good question. I mean, I think there's no doubt that the president at some point will want to have his face on camera and do a bit of a victory lap. Whether that ends up being today, Easter Sunday, or early in the week is hard to say. He did call yesterday, the press operation called an early lid, which is the terminology for when the press pool is essentially dismissed and told that no other activity with the president is taking place that day. He didn't go golfing. And now we know why. We know what he was doing, monitoring this operation. But today, with that success behind him, it's certainly possible that he'll want to say something, unless he decides to hold off because of Easter and address it more publicly later this week.
All right, Bloomberg White House correspondent Jeff Mason and our Jerusalem reporter Dan Williams. Dan, I am missing the lovely citrus trees that are usually in your shot, but I'm glad you're inside. I hope you're comfortable. All right, coming up, President Trump made an unprecedented move last week, and that is he went to oral arguments and sat in the Supreme Court.
Front row.
For this birthright citizenship debate. As you know, it's been a big part of his immigration agenda, something he's very passionate about. The court, even the more conservative members of the court, seemed a little bit skeptical of these arguments.
That's right. That was the headline that came out of this, was skepticism, and a president who apparently left hastily and not very happy. Let's also remember that was the day he fired the attorney general. And there has been some narrative from inside the White House that this might have been the final straw in the way he heard and saw that case being presented.
Well, on that note, we're going to talk to two experts about the potential economic cost of overturning birthright citizenship and what the Supreme Court decision could mean for the American economy. That's straight ahead on Bloomberg this weekend. You can watch us on all the platforms. We're on your TV, radio, YouTube, and of course, the Bloomberg Business app. Stick with us.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on some of the top stories. And Polymarket is apologizing, and that's for allowing wagers on the fate of the U.S. airmen that were downed in Iran. Now, it's since deleted market. Users were able to place bets on when the pilots might be rescued after their fighter jet was shot down Friday. Both crew members have been rescued. Representative Seth Moulton, he's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, also served in Iraq. He slammed the prediction market platform in a post on X, calling it, quote, disgusting. Polymarket replied to that post with an apology. They said they're looking into how this slipped through their internal safeguards. Well, the Artemis astronauts, they're more than halfway to the moon. The 3 Americans, 1 Canadian, will reach their destination Monday, performing a lunar flyby, then coming straight back home. On the downside, their toilet is having some issues again. Judd Freeling, Artemis lead flight director, spoke about it at a mission briefing yesterday.
We tried to vent the wastewater tank that's attached to the toilet. We had problems with that due to a suspected blockage, we think probably due to ice.
Yeah, it started malfunctioning on Wednesday during liftoff, and it's kind of been hit or miss ever since. Let's go to SpaceX now. All right, they've delayed their next test flight. That's of its massive Starship rocket. Elon Musk said the next launch attempt, it would occur sometime in early to mid-May. In January, Musk said the new version of Starship, it would launch in early March, and then he later pushed that date to around April 7th. Christina and Joe.
Thanks, Lisa. The U.S. Supreme Court is currently considering whether to strike down President Donald Trump's executive order limiting birthright citizenship. And while Trump has made this about his immigration policy largely, it also poses a potential economic problem as well. If the amendment is altered or if citizenship is overturned, it could mean a loss of about $1 trillion and 400,000 college-educated workers in the future.
This is a huge economic story that we want to invest some time in on this Easter Sunday. And with us now, Francesc Ortega, professor of sustainable development at the University of Notre Dame and Princeton University Center for Migration and Development Research fellow Phillip O'Connor. Gentlemen, happy Easter and thank you for joining us. You both took part in a fascinating study, multi-trillion-dollar and multi-million worker contributions. Give us a sense, Phillip, I will start with you, how long it would take for this $1 trillion loss to be realized.
So we essentially looked at this executive order, looked at those that were born to two undocumented or two temporary immigrant parents, both in the past, so they're already currently working in the workforce, as well as those in the future. And we essentially, as totaling all that up in terms of an accounting exercise, we determined that there would be about $7.7 trillion that they would have contributed within the next few decades, as well as the past few decades. When it comes to those in the future, that $1 trillion number, that would be realized over their working lifetimes. So many of them, of course, are not yet to be born. We'd be born in the next few decades, but then those individuals will likely become adults later on and be able to contribute to the workforce. And that could be that potential $1 trillion loss.
And for just looking at these numbers, it looks like certain parts of the country are likely to feel this more than others. Where are the parts of the country that could really be impacted by this?
Yeah, so the geographical differences in the impacts really boil down to demographic differences. Basically, if we think about California and Texas, that's where the largest group of beneficiaries of birthright citizenship live. So just those two states would account for about 1/3 of the overall effect. But the other 2/3 are really spread all over the country.
So it would be something that you think most Americans would notice the impact of?
Yes, definitely. So just in those two states, California and Texas, we estimate that there are over 1 million people, U.S. citizens, that gained their citizenship thanks to the birthright citizenship law.
Wow.
Pretty staggering numbers here when you consider these two states in California, more than $2 trillion alone, almost 1.5 in Texas. These are economies larger than some countries, Phillip. When you just put the California and Texas effect in place alone, could this be recessionary?
Well, it's hard to say of how that could play out with a number of other factors. Mm-hmm. This wouldn't be immediate. It would be something that we felt over a longer period of time. And that was the aim of the study, to give that broad lifetime look. Sometimes, as we look into these numbers, we want to be careful to be able to see that long-term effect. The numbers would kind of speak for themselves in terms of the volume. Mm-hmm. I would add also that in our estimates here, we really went a very conservative approach to really define the population as being those that were children of two undocumented parents that were living in the U.S. today and maybe would have children in the future. And so these numbers are very conservative. It could be as twice as much, depending on what kind of assumptions you put on the data. This certainly would have a strong impact if birthright citizenship were to be denied for these individuals into the future.
And Francesc, I'm looking at a big graph here that shows all the different economic sectors that could be hit hardest. Surprisingly, you have office administration at the top, and then other things like construction, architecture. Where do you think this would be most noticed the soonest, were this to be, I don't even know how you want to say it, reversed, or if the president's policy would be upheld and birthright citizenship as we know it were to be altered in some way?
So most likely if the executive order were to be sustained and were to be implemented, most likely the effects, it would not be applied retroactively. So this means that the group of people who would be most harmed by the order are yet to be born. Okay. So in that sense, the impact would not be immediate. It would just unfold over the next couple of decades.
So then how did you make that estimation that these are the industries that were going to be harmed the hardest? Is it just looking forward at where you expect growth and these individuals to be working and extrapolating from there?
Yeah, so basically like that. So what we do in our study is we use current data about working age individuals who benefited from birthright citizenship, learn about what are the occupations where they are employed, what are the earnings that they are making in those occupations, and then based on those data, we project forward to see to estimate what would be the impact for the future beneficiaries. So we rely on existing data on current adults to make predictions about what would be the contribution to the labor market and to the economy, to GDP, of current children beneficiaries and future beneficiaries over the next couple of decades.
You know, Phillip, I'm sure you can speak to the fact that this could potentially exacerbate an already major problem. When we talk about industries like construction, like agriculture, that have already been on their heels because of the president's mass deportation policy, what would it mean to add these continued job losses? These industries might not be able to function in some cases, no?
Yeah, so it's a really broad look. In fact, you know, we have an aging population in the United States right now.
Yeah.
Work shortages are likely, labor shortages are going to probably exist well into the future at a variety of industries. You named a few. What could really be telling in the decades ahead is the fact without birthright citizenship, these individuals would have no access to essentially post-secondary education. And we found that nearly 2/3 of those in the past actually were working in industries that require some high level of higher education. And so you're going to be missing out on that total workforce, that more educated workforce, because they wouldn't have had access under a citizenship to actually obtain those kind of jobs. So it would create in many ways an entirely underclass of individuals that wouldn't even have access perhaps even to jobs that you mentioned earlier in the construction industry as well as the agricultural industry because of their legal status.
Wow.
Before we let you guys go, I just want to know, I know you said this is not a political study, and before coming on, we were told you guys don't want to talk about the politics of this. You want to talk about it as an economics issue, something I can get on board with. But I do want to ask you, you know, from a human perspective, from a perspective of what the U.S. means globally, what kind of message do you think it's sending to the global economy, to allies, and even people who aspire to maybe live in the U.S. someday? What kind of message this is sending if, in fact, this executive order is upheld and birthright citizenship, as we know it, no longer exists in its current form?
It's a world that we really don't know of in the United States, where birthright citizenship doesn't exist. In fact, that's one of the challenges of the study, to be able to get an idea of what that would be in the future, because we don't really have comparisons to evaluate it. And so looking to the future, I think it certainly speaks to the fact that if this executive order were to stand, we would have that underclass. And although in some ways an undocumented population that's already here today are functioning in our workforce, but they have limitations because of their legal status, you would further have a population that wouldn't be able to access education potentially. It would be an experience that really we don't comprehend totally because we've never seen it before.
Francesc, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd like to add that, so if we take a broader, an international perspective, there are countries where citizenship is not connected to birthplace. It's passed from parents to children, and children get the nationality of their kids. However, we have to be careful in extrapolating to the US, because in those countries, usually there are already established ways through which children born to, let's say, undocumented or temporary residents.
Right, that's been the policy for several decades, if not longer. Yeah.
Right, so in those countries, there are ways that those children can eventually naturalize. But currently in the US, those pathways do not exist. So it's hard to extrapolate from the experience of other countries. And it's safer to think about what has been the experience of the US and the current practice. And this would be a very big departure from that.
Certainly uncharted territory. All right. Thank you both so much. Francesc Ortega and Phillip Connor, thank you for joining us. All right, if you are just joining us this morning, we have breaking news, and as the U.S. has recovered that missing airman after a quite extensive operation in Iran involving special forces, airlift, CIA, possibly Israeli intelligence as well, and the president took to Twitter in the early hours of the morning to announce the news.
Hundreds of troops involved here, including SEAL Team 6. The CIA actually managed to locate the individual, pass that information to the Pentagon, and with some really amazing reporting in the New York Times, the airman evaded Iranian forces for more than 24 hours, Christina, at one point hiking up a 7,000-foot ridge line. The president of the United States.
This is after ejecting and coming down hard on the ground.
Which in itself is a harrowing experience. The president said they were watching him. They had eyes on this individual the whole time. But of course, that individual with nothing but a sidearm and a beacon and a communications device that apparently was not used extensively for fear that he might be outed, I'm sure had no idea that they were watching.
The Times is reporting as well, and it's very smart, but I didn't realize they could do this, that he was throttling the beacon system as well, which is why the CIA and not the Air Force had to locate him, because it wasn't consistent, because that's something Iran can intercept. In the background of all that, there were other strikes throughout the region overnight. Iran says 5 people were killed and 170 wounded when an airstrike on a petrochemical complex in southwest Iran happened. That strike has been claimed by the IDF. Bahrain saw a drone attack at a storage facility that caused fires to break out throughout the state energy company's facility. Kuwait and other places, Abu Dhabi as well, fires. Saudi Arabia saw cruise missiles, but says they were shot down.
And we remember that the ultimatum is still in effect unless President Trump says otherwise. He posted yesterday, gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the Strait. Time is running out, 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them. Christina, tomorrow night could be something.
All right, up next, we'll check in with that spacecraft, and we'll have a conversation with the author of Project Hail Mary. That's up next on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date with some of the top stories. And a wildfire in Southern California has been mostly contained. Officials lifted most evacuation orders for the Springs fire in Riverside County. It broke out Friday morning. Strong Santa Ana winds that have been spreading the fire. Well, they died down on Saturday. About 260 personnel battled that blaze. No structures were damaged. The cause of that fire still under investigation. President Donald Trump has filed an emergency appeal to keep building the White House ballroom. The Trump administration has appealed the judge's order to stop construction, arguing that pausing the $400 million project, well, it would raise national security risks. Justice Department lawyers said the planned 90,000 square foot addition to the White House, it's being designed to defend against, quote, hostile attacks via drones, ballistic missiles, bullets, biohazards, and other potential threats to the presidents. In sports, the men's NCAA national championship game, it's set with Michigan taking on UConn on Monday. Michigan last night actually beat Arizona 91-73, and UConn topped Illinois 71-62. The women's tournament, South Carolina, UCLA, they play for the national championship. Christina and Joe, that takes place later today. Should be exciting.
All right, you know I love the sports ball, Lisa. So
of course you do.
I'm glad David's here because we're 2-1 today. Usually you guys are 2-1. So, all right, thank you. Of course, we've been watching the Artemis mission to the moon for the past few days, and tomorrow is really the main event.
This is it.
We've got 4 astronauts, one of them named Christina, which no, I'm not letting go. 3 Americans, 1 Canadian, and they are preparing for this much anticipated lunar flyby.
Yeah, this is the actual moment. This will be the real stuff. Monday afternoon, 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time, just as the early edition of Balance of Power is about to end. They will break the record, right? For the farthest distance humans have ever traveled from Earth, set by Apollo 13 astronauts in 1970. Get your head around this. 248,655 miles from Earth. Can you imagine?
No. And then we go into 40 minutes of excitement and or terror where they go out of comms. You have to have line of sight for communications, the dark side of the moon.
No thanks.
As they travel behind the moon. This is going to be the first time humans have laid eyes on the dark side of the moon. We've been listening to NASA playing their wake-up music in the morning, and I hope they play some dark side of the moon that day.
There's going to be some Pink Floyd before this is over. Truly historic moment for space travel. Coming more than 50 years after humans first set foot on the moon, the astronauts are expected to return to this planet on Friday night.
And speaking of interstellar space travel,
Yeah.
there's a big hit movie at the moment called Project Hail Mary.
This is a serious case of good timing, huh?
Yeah, it's almost like we planned it. It stars Ryan Gosling as a science teacher who gets sent into space against his will to stop a mysterious substance from killing the sun. We were lucky enough to sit down with the author of the book the film is based on, Andy Weir, who wrote Project Hail Mary, and he talks about where he creates these sci-fi worlds, how he thinks about them, and how he visualizes the stories. When you were pitching this to your publishers, you said, hey, I got an idea for a guy who's kind of trapped in space by himself and he's got to like science his way out of it. At any point, did they say to you, dude, you already wrote this book?
Yeah, you already wrote that. Well, I mean, I pitched it to him as like, I've got a first contact story and interstellar travel and stuff like that. And, you know, he's not alone.
Was there a debate about whether or not to reveal the alien in the movie trailers and things like that? Because
there was.
So how did that go? And how do you feel about that they did reveal him?
So there was a lot of discussion about that because, of course, in the book, it's a complete.
I had no idea. I literally screamed at the book.
Yeah. That was the intent. We wanted you specifically to scream at the book.
Perfect.
But that was a big twist, and the readers are very good about not spoiling things for each other. Moviegoers are not. Like moviegoers will tell each other everything, and also like if we hid the fact that Rocky was in the movie, I mean, by now, everybody would be talking about there's an alien in this movie. Like, it would be general public knowledge. So we thought that plus, hey, this isn't just a story about some schlub out in space by himself. This is a story that includes an alien and all sorts of really cool stuff. And that we want to draw people into the theater. Things get a lot more interesting when they find out, okay, there's an alien in this one.
And it's not like a little green man alien. It's basically an anthropomorphized rock.
So I was trying to avoid anything that looked like, just a human.
Not getting your Captain Kirk vibes?
No.
Okay, all right.
I wanted an alien that was very, very alien. And so I wanted his environment to be incompatible with ours and vice versa. I mean, shoot, that happens on Earth. Like, if you exchange the positions of a shark and a camel, they're both going to die. Right. And so,
I don't know a lot about science, but I know that is true.
You know that is true. There are very few aquatic camels.
To our detriment. So which comes first when you're writing, the science or the plot?
Usually the science. In this case, I'll figure out something that I want, and then I'll kind of back calculate a way to allow that and try to find the minimum little violation of like real world physics or whatever.
I'm a former White House correspondent, foreign affairs correspondent, and in D.C. there is a book.
I'm a big step down.
No, this is incorrect.
Big step down.
Correct. This is the interview I've been looking forward to most for weeks. There is a book club of all former or current White House producers and correspondents in D.C. It's all women. We do not read sci-fi. We read like smart fiction, sometimes less smart fiction. Usually it's a way to escape the news cycle and drink some wine and talk about our families. Someone suggested this book. It was a bit out of left field. My group chat is blowing up this morning with questions for you because they are all completely obsessed with this. One was, did you visualize Ryland being as hot as Ryan Gosling?
I did not.
Okay.
To be fair, though, I don't have a very visual imagination
I heard
at
you
all.
Talking about this.
Yeah.
This is really interesting to me.
Yeah. So I'm kind of on the aphantasia scale, which means like when I try to visualize something, I get more of a blob. I mean, it's not. So they usually use.
But how does that work when you're writing?
It's conceptual. Like, so in my mind, what I'm seeing is a concept, like a blob of a person talking to a blob of another person in a sort of a blobby, undefined background. The best way to describe it would be is if you've ever had a dream and, the focus of the dream is you talking to the magical cat or whatever's happening in your dream. The background, like, describe the background. It's like you didn't define it in your head. And so you can't really tell me what's in the background. It's just sort of this blobby. There's something there, but for me, it's also in the foreground. It's just this concepts.
I mean, I personally like that about your writing because it allows the reader to kind of fill in a bunch of those details, which is why I think we were all so interested in seeing Rocky, the alien, because I had a really hard time picturing what that looks like.
I could tell you, he has a pentagonal thorax, kind of, and he has like 5 legs, and they each end in 3 claws. But I don't know, like, if his limbs were skinny or thick, or if they're smooth or bumpy, or if they're symmetrical or asymmetrical. So when I went to the model shop during the shoot, and when I went to the model shop and saw Rocky, that was like the first time I'd seen Rocky. It was like, oh, I get it. Oh, so that's what Rocky looks like. Now I know.
That's incredible. And you and I were talking briefly earlier. It seems like Rocky might be getting better VIP treatment than you on the press tour. Do you want to explain what you were saying to me earlier about who gets the nicer hotel suite? For our viewers who don't know, Rocky is it's a practical effect. So it's a giant like puppet that's operating. I love practical effects. Yeah,
it's as practical as it gets. I mean, there's CG, like smoothing of the motions, some and like some of the finger movements and stuff like that. And there's plenty of CG shots. Let's be clear, and also the digital removal of all the sticks of puppeteers and things. But so at the junket, the media junket for this, which was in LA, I was like, I'm feeling good about this. They got me in a real nice room, you know. It's kind of a suite.
Having your moment.
Yeah, I'm an important guy. And then like Rocky's room, because they had a room for Rocky where like reporters could go like talk to Rocky and stuff like that. Rocky got the presidential suite on the top floor. It's a penthouse.
Finally, you said you're optimistic about the human race. One of the things that I think was so interesting about this book is initially your main character is kind of a weenie. He doesn't want to do the thing. They make him do the thing. And the arc of his personal growth over time in the book is quite incredible and redeeming. Is that kind of what you're hoping for the rest of us?
So I'm always trying to work on my character depth, complexity, and nuance, because I think that's my weakest part of writing. I'm good at the science. I think I'm good at coming up with interesting and compelling plots, but it's my characters that I really need to like level up on.
But I would argue that's where this book really stands out.
Thank you, because that's I put a lot of work into it, so I appreciate it. And so I wanted to have a flawed but likable character, and I think we've all felt that way before. We've all felt like scared, overwhelmed, and underqualified. I mean,
every day, man, every day.
As a writer, that's your whole life. I mean, you know, give a man a book, you entertain him for a night. Teach a man to write, you give him crippling self-doubt for life.
Oh God, that's so true.
So I wanted to make him relatable, and then he has a redemption arc, and so that was deliberate. Thank you. I'm glad it landed.
Anything else you want to add about humanity, space?
I'm a fan of both.
The funny thing is, you know, he's so self-deprecating, but he said he really worked on his characters in this book. When you watch the movie, it is almost entirely a character study. It is just about the relationship between those two.
Did you meet Rocky?
I said, we're working on it. We're working on it. All right, BT Dubs is coming up next. No holiday break for Lisa. She'll have our stories after the break. All right, welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is now for the segment that I call BT Dubs. David Gura insists on saying BTW. So as the sub-host, which of those would you like to say?
I guess I'd go W, but now, like, I know that, well, I mean, it sounds like a radio station coming up on BTW. But
well, that's true. All right.
I'm just, do you guys call the show, is that shorthand for the show, like off the air?
Yeah, Bloomberg This Weekend, and it's BT Dubs.
It takes me sometimes a little while to catch up.
No, we were very proud of ourselves when we figured that out.
Yeah, good job.
All right, Lisa, what you got for us today?
Okay, we talk a lot about AI, right? Okay, so this one is a story from Bloomberg News. Want to read you the headline. Okay, so meet the new AI coworker who won't stop snitching to your boss. Okay, so this is a company, it's called Keough AI. So they created this AI employee, okay? They call it Junior. It's entirely virtual, okay? So companies buy this, okay? And this Junior can access company data. It knows who does what, knows what colleagues are connected to each other, okay? It can join every Zoom call. It drafts marketing campaigns. It does all this, but you know what it also does? It snitches. It goes on Slack, and it starts to point out different coworkers who are not keeping up and following up on their duties.
Okay.
And it starts to call them out on it on Slack in front of the boss, in front of everybody who else is on Slack.
This is the AI that's going to improve our lives, right?
Yes.
Okay.
This is another reason for me to dislike Slack.
Don't we have something like that in the terminal? They can tell when we come and when we go. And
when I started here, they said, well, when you scan in, it goes on your email and everyone can see when you're in the office. I find that terrifying.
Yeah, you can't hide here.
To be clear, that's an internal function. External users, you can't look us up and find out if we're in the building.
It's about $2,000 a month. So companies are paying. No, they're trained to test it out and see if they like it and if the employees like it. But we'll see. It's out there.
I just don't feel like it's just like squeezing, juice from a rock. I don't feel like they're getting more productivity out of people who are being bombarded with apps that they're not in the apps.
That's for sure.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Okay. All right. What else you got?
Question. Are you a workout guy, Joe? Do you go to the gym?
Do you not, by looking at me, have an answer to that? She had to ask.
Christina, you work out, all right? I know she does.
We know
This is
you
a
do
new
because you
one.
posted at 4 a.m. on your Instagram like a lunatic, but yes.
This is a new one for you, Joe. Okay, so stay tuned. This is from the Wall Street Journal. It says, muscles by electricity, the latest fitness craze. Okay, this is electrical muscle stimulation, or EMS.
Yes.
So people are using it to boost your workout. So basically what is it's a suit that you put on, right? And it has these electrodes in it. And so it zaps your muscles. So basically it's helping them contract so that you don't have to work out for as long.
Yes, right.
So they're saying that maybe about 20 minutes equals about an hour in the gym. So it lessens your gym time, but you're getting zapped.
Yes,
Is this
right.
proven? Has someone studied
this is real, by the way.
Really? The product is real.
I have actually
Yes.
tried something like this. My
Really?
wife runs like a
You
biohacking studio, and they put these paddles on you, and it sort of like shocks you, and you feel like you did 200,000 sit-ups in 5 minutes or something like that.
You notice the
But,
difference.
yeah, I mean, you feel sort of like...
It's like when your phone kind of vibrates on vibrate, and if
actually
you had it near you.
That's a pretty good
that's how they,
analogy.
that's how they
exactly.
explain it. So, but it can go
That's
up in
why
intensity.
you knew I work out. You just didn't realize how
See?
easy it was for
You
me.
just- I guess
on it.
Yeah.
I guess when I had a spinal cord injury and they had to like stick electrodes in the muscles to get them to like wake back up.
Yeah.
And I guess that did work. So
Okay,
if that
see?
theory works,
Maybe
it does contract the muscles. I just didn't think.
Plug me in. I don't even have to get
Does
up.
this mean I don't have to do planks anymore? That would
Yes,
be
that's
great.
the idea.
Okay, all right. Well then, yay technology.
See, it's shortening your workout. This one I want to point to the weekend. This is from Bloomberg. It says, for China's rich, the new must-have is a luxury home in Zimbabwe. Okay, so this is a really interesting story. So the luxury homes cost about $500,000 to $2 million there. This is in Harare, that's Zimbabwe's capital. So they have their own solar power supplies, big real estate agencies hiring Mandarin speakers.
Wow.
They say, why Zimbabwe? And you're saying, why? Because the country has higher literacy, established industries, a well-trained workforce, and the Chinese are really starting to take over. They're making money there. You see different restaurants, too, popping up there in the region because of it.
That's really cool.
So it is. So they're developing it, and this is an up-and-coming sector, too.
Amazing.
This one I want to get to before we run out of time. I know I'm watching the clock. Boston Globe, okay? So let me break down the story first, okay? This is Beverly Mansion burglar, likely had inside knowledge. This is what experts say. Okay, so the basic rundown, okay, a home invasion in Beverly. The intruder broke into this $18 million waterfront mansion in Pride's Crossing, right, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods. The caretaker was home. She was a family friend. She was assaulted, tied up. The reporter, this is the story. Her name is Emily Sweeney. She was interviewed. She interviewed the homeowner on social media, and it's the video that was posted to the Boston Globe telling the story that's really getting some attention. Listen up.
Several valuables were stolen, including a Porsche that was used to escape from the property. The car has since been recovered, but the suspect remains at large. The caretaker, who was tied up, managed to escape and go to a neighbor's house for help.
Shout out to Emily Sweeney. She's getting it up because of her Boston accent telling the story. If you're watching on TV, she's actually wearing an Adidas tracksuit too.
Yep.
So
She's done another one since in another tracksuit and looks iconic.
She does a lot of the Emily, and I know Emily Sweeney pretty well. I actually spent a lot of years doing news in Boston. That's home for me. She's the pride of Dorchester. And she has been cranking out videos like these for years. How did this become a viral
She
sensation
came up
now?
in my feed, and the comments
love
are
this.
like, can she read me bedtime stories? Like, I want her. She's the only person allowed to do the news from now in perpetuity. Like, caretaker. Like, Emily, I love you.
It's so
You're
great.
such an icon.
No one deserves to be famous more than Emily Sweeney today. I love that. Happy Easter.
I will say also the Boston Globe social media team has been really great. They've been doing a great job across the park.
No doubt.
Come on set, Emily. You can talk to us about whatever you want for as long as you want.
That's so cool.
Thanks, Lisa. That was a great mix today. All right, we are coming up on 8 a.m. here in New York. And of course, on a more serious note, there is a lot of headlines out of the world today. And we're going to update you on the latest from Iran and the rescue of that missing American service member.
Remarkable that they actually found this pilot after 24 hours in hiding, and a harrowing story we have to tell about how it happened.
That's right. The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are joining you at the 8 a.m. hour here at our global world headquarters, global news headquarters. One of those things is correct. It's a holiday. Apologies. Here in New York, David Gura is off. Joe Mathieu is stuck with me today. And of course, Lisa Mateo is also here. We are here every Saturday and Sunday, 7 to 10 a.m., bringing you all the latest breaking news. And there is quite a bit of it this morning.
There sure is. And it keeps breaking. The big story, of course, breaking overnight, as we heard from the president shortly after midnight, the rescue of that missing U.S. service member, the Airman that went down in the fighter jet shot down over Iran. We've just gotten word that President Trump will hold a news conference tomorrow. He just posted on Truth Social. I will be having a news conference with the military in the Oval Office Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And of course, you can expect to hear and see that here on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is going to be an important development and a story that we're following. And we ought to get right now to Lisa Mateo with all the headlines.
Yes, and that missing airman safe and sound. That's after Iran downed that fighter jet. And this is as the conflict continues in the Persian, as Iran continues to attack the Persian Gulf states. Let's get right to Donald Trump's post. This is from the president himself. He called the service member who had been missing since Friday a brave warrior. He said he sustained injuries but will be just fine. The New York Times reporting the rescue operation involved hundreds of special operation troops. The U.S. aircraft dropping bombs and firing on Iranian convoys to kind of keep them away from where the airman was hiding. The publication adding that he may have relied on locals who were anti-regime. Now, that other crew member on board the jet was reported to have been saved earlier. Now, the rescue comes. The war enters its sixth week. Tehran continuing to attack its neighbors. Earlier this weekend, President Trump threatened to unleash, quote, all hell on Iran as early as Monday, saying that 10-day deadline for the country to make a peace deal with the U.S. was running out. Now, the president has also warned that if Iran doesn't agree to his terms and open that Strait of Hormuz to all shipping traffic out of the Persian Gulf, the U.S. would bomb the country's civilian energy infrastructure. Iran announced Saturday that Iraq, a major oil producer, would be exempt from its shipping restrictions in the Strait, allowing as much as 3 million barrels a day of Iraqi oil cargoes. Well, to the war in Ukraine, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he's ready to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin for negotiations to end the war between their countries.
We are ready to come. I always said that we are ready for the meeting on the level of leaders in any kind of format.
Well, Zelensky, he made those comments in Istanbul, and that's after meeting with Turkey's president. Well, today is Easter, and let's go to the Vatican. That's where Pope Leo XIV, he is celebrating his first Easter vigil at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. It's Leo's first Holy Week as leader of the Roman Catholic Church. That mass still ongoing. We'll bring you more on it as the morning does continue. Christina and Joe.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. As we were talking about at the top of the hour just hours ago, President Trump announced it on social media that the second missing airman has been rescued safely from Iran. He also had an exclusive text message exchange with NBC's Kristen Welker. In that, the president called the rescue, quote, an Easter miracle. He went on to say, according to NBC, the enemy was large and violent. The rescuers were brilliant, strong, divisive, as cool as anyone can be. The Iranians thought they had him, but it wasn't even close. And remember, we got two, but couldn't talk about the first one. It would have highlighted that there was a second. Such a rescue has never happened before. And it goes on from there, finishing with such a great military like no other. Happy Easter.
That was on Truth Social, to be clear. He just posted this at the top of the hour, and now promising a news conference at 1 p.m. tomorrow. He says it'll be with the military, Christina, presumably the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, maybe the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, will be there with him. But a news conference that could be wide-ranging. That will be only hours away from the ultimatum that he has given Iran to open the Strait.
Still a bit surprising we're not hearing from the president today, but obviously he's got to hustle back to Washington to make this joint news conference happen and have those military leaders behind him. This is the president who is very aware of visuals, and that's certainly the message he wants to send, as he wants to be doing this, I'm assuming, back in Washington as we get the information. And he will likely have an update on the condition of that pilot. He said in his Truth Social post he was injured. Not seriously, we don't think so. He's being treated, but maybe he'll have an update on his condition.
Well, it is interesting. At the top of this post, he says, we have rescued the seriously wounded and really brave F-15 crew member officer from deep inside the mountains of Iran.
Oh, this is the newest post that just came up.
Suggesting that, because in the earlier post he said no lives were lost and no one was wounded, but now we're saying seriously wounded, remembering this individual punched out, actually ejected from an F-15 fighter jet and may have been wounded before even getting to the ground.
if nothing else, your body is taking a beating. He, as we were mentioning, hiked up a mountain thousands of feet. We don't know what he had for water. You're not carrying food supplies with you. He's probably dehydrated, a little bit malnourished, and I would imagine his body and his adrenal glands have just had it. Exactly, 100%.
It's very common to have broken bones, a burst spleen. These are all pretty common things that come from, and 2 black eyes when you eject. Because you hit the air so hard, it's like crashing into a wall. That's when you begin trying to avoid a manhunt. It's truly remarkable what this person went through.
All right, we want to go to our guests to break this all down for us. Back with us are Bloomberg's White House correspondent Jeff Mason and our Jerusalem reporter Dan Williams. Jeff, we're going to start with you. As Joe just mentioned, President clarifying the condition of that pilot a little bit and the fact that we're going to have a press conference, but not today. A statement. Unclear if it's a press conference, but not today.
First of all, happy to be confused with Joe at any time. And second of all, at least that clarifies when we're going to see the president in person to talk about some of these things or make this statement from the Oval Office. Listen, this is a major success for him. It's an extraordinary military operation, and it covers up is the wrong way to say it, but it makes up for what was otherwise a huge political risk after that aircraft went down in Iranian territory on Friday. The president had already started off last week by saying that he intended to pull the United States out of this war within 2 to 3 weeks. He's been very frustrated by the increase in oil prices and the subsequent increase in gasoline prices. And so the reporting was beginning to show broadly that he was just over this war. Then this happens on Friday and really ups the political risk for him in terms of potential casualties and really broadly questioning whether or not the United States was really ready to go into this war that it started. All of that comes with, for the United States, a happy ending because this man was rescued, and I'm sure that the president is going to emphasize that when he speaks to the press and the public tomorrow.
Well, just quickly, Jeff, do we expect an announcement that if he holds forth at 1 p.m. Eastern time, that'll be less than 8 hours, if I remember correctly, as to when the ultimatum would hit for Iran to open the Strait. Is that going to be the final warning, or might he have a change in strategy?
It's just really hard to say, Joe. The president has changed his strategy so often over the last 5+ weeks that I think people are just always ready for a potential additional shift. My guess is that tomorrow he's going to want to focus on the military success that we've just been talking about, but he'll certainly be asked about that ultimatum and the latest on that and whether or not he's sticking to it or giving them a little bit more time.
I also want to flag, although I can't read on television due to the profanity in it, there is another tweet that has posted less than 4 minutes ago, I'm sorry, at Truth Social, from the president. To your point, Joe, about this deadline that says Tuesday will be power plant and bridge day, all wrapped into one Iran. It says there will be nothing like it. Open the effing Strait, you crazy word I can't say on TV, or you'll be living in word I can't say on TV. Wow. Just watch. Praise be to Allah, signed President Donald J. Trump.
Praise be to Allah.
Dan, your reaction to that, and I know you do have information. We want to remind folks, Israel, it seems like may have been involved in helping find this pilot. What have you reported out? What have you heard on involvement from Tel Aviv in this rescue?
Well, I promise to keep it all PG-13 as is fitting for this broadcast. Yes, the Israelis say they had a part in this rescue operation. It would appear a supporting role, mainly in suppressing fire against those Iranian troops, Iranian forces, militiamen who tried to reach that downed airman, and also in the supply of intelligence, presumably real-time tactical intelligence, given that there would have been several moving elements here, not just the movement of this airman trying to avoid capture and link up with the rescue party, but the rescue party and the Iranian forces. And of course, in all this, when you have close mesh allies working in a busy tactical environment, they have to make sure not to clash with one another inadvertently. So yes, the Israelis say they're a part of this, although they'll certainly leave the heavy lifting, the credit taking appropriately to the US president, to the Americans. There have been statements of congratulation by a number of senior Israeli ministers and the like. As for Trump's strong words around Iran, as Jeff noted, we're nearing that deadline that he set for a threatened resumption or a certain embarking on energy attacks on energy sites in Iran, which would definitely upset what remains of the apple cart here, because the Iranians have shown already that they're very capable of hitting energy assets in neighboring Arab countries they see as being in cahoots with the Americans. Presumably they're capable of stepping this up to hit power stations and the like, and plunging the region into darkness, I think, was one threat issued by Tehran just a couple of weeks ago. So yes, we'll see that. All the while, we should remember there's another ticking clock on this. We're now in week 6 of this war. At the outset, Israel and the U.S. said there'd be a 4 to 6 week envelope. They estimated at a time until this war would be concluded or carried. So we're really running against the upper edge of that timeline, though again, we've already had statements from Washington suggesting it could go on into 8 weeks. But I think the questions and skepticism that have been swirling around this war from the outset are definitely going to harden the closer we get to the edge of that 6-week timeline. Of
course, the threats against the civilian infrastructure in Iran would run counter to the president who said help is on its way in an effort to protect people who had been protesting their government. But Dan, I just want to ask you about the way some of the president's rhetoric is landing in Israel. There have been 2 posts in the last 24 hours that made references to God, i.e. holy war, if you're reading into this. The first was, time is running out, 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them. Glory be to God. And on this Easter morning now, praise be to Allah. How is that interpreted in Israel?
Well, this Israeli government, a government that was democratically elected, doesn't lack for its own religious elements. It's religious nationalists, fundamentalists. And indeed, the prime minister, though to all appearances a secular man, has very much invoked religion, especially since October the 7th, which was in miniature a genocidal attack on Israelis that for many shook their faith in a country that was meant to give them security, in their personal security. And many of them re-injected that fear into a new zeal, which we've seen in the way that this war has been prosecuted. Keep in mind that it's a conscript military, people who really aren't being paid and haven't freely signed up. They're doing it because it's their duty to the country. And the losses have been steep for the Israelis. Obviously, they've been extremely steep in Gaza. But at a per capita level, the number of soldiers Israel lost from that conscript military in these 2.5 years is more than 4 times the number of soldiers the United States lost in the entirety of the Afghanistan and Iraq operations. Those ran into 20 years in the case of Afghanistan, 8 to 12 years Iraq, depending who you ask. So a major, major sacrifice here. The polls show that while there has been a diminution to a degree of the support for this war, it still has majority support. Many Israelis see it as a support against a millenarian regime in Iran that wants their destruction and are responding in kind. So I don't think that those quotes will be seen as anything amiss in this part of the world, at least.
Jeff, I mean, I hate to ask a political question, given that there are lives on the line here, but I have to ask a political question. How are Republicans feeling about this conflict, especially going into the midterms? Because if, as we're talking about, if you're going by the president's rhetoric this morning, it doesn't seem like this is ramping down. And we've actually got a tweet from a strong presidential ally, Lindsey Graham, saying that he had a call with Trump from Saturday after our show last week, saying, after speaking with President Trump, I'm completely convinced that he will use overwhelming military force against the regime if they continue to impede the Strait of Hormuz and refuse a diplomatic solution to achieve our military objectives. Choose wisely. Apologies, I was off the show yesterday, not last week. Is this a liability? Is it enough of a liability that you think Republicans could say, let's dial it back? Or is everybody in his fold staying on board for the time being?
It is absolutely a liability. And it's a liability because the majority of Americans are opposed to this war. And with the midterm elections coming in November, you're not just thinking about your political base and you're not just thinking about hawkish Republicans. You're thinking about the other independents, some Democrats and Republicans who you need to vote for your party members in an effort to try to hold on to control of Congress. And right now, the House looks very vulnerable, and the Senate's a little bit vulnerable too, a little bit less so. So yeah, it's absolutely a liability. That said, to sort of tie in with Joe's question to Dan, I think you see the president using various sales pitch strategies here. Last week, certainly talking on Wednesday night about the fact that this war has not been as long as other U.S. wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, World War I, World War II, but also just the religious language that he used in the social media post today. I think that is also an attempt to gin up support among the evangelical right, which is a good chunk of his base, and sort of create a religious angle to this war to influence how people are thinking about it. That's not going to work with a big chunk of the electorate, but it may work with his base, because that's a really important element for them.
The president has long fancied wrapping events around Easter. Jeff, remember in COVID when we were going to reopen on Easter weekend? And that was long before anyone was ready to reopen anything. Here we are again on an Easter Sunday when he's trying to seize on the holiday to deliver a message. We've seen this before.
We absolutely have seen this before, and I'm glad you mentioned COVID. I remember being in the press room in the days before Easter in 2020 and asking his then press secretary about his statement that everything would be opened up again for Easter, and her making a comment about, well, there are people in the press room who don't believe in God or don't want to go to church, or some kind of flippant remark about that. And my response to that was, this is not about what we believe, it's about wanting to know if it's safe. I share that anecdote just to tie into your broader point, Joe, which is that the president absolutely ties things to days like this and wants to gin up emotions connected to religion, because that is a huge issue for lots of Americans, but particularly Republicans and people in the MAGA base.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Jeff Mason, Dan Williams, thank you both so much for joining us again on this holiday. We appreciate you both.
Really interesting as we think back. And boy, I remember watching Jeff in the briefing room at that time, and it's hard to forget these moments. He does have a way. This is the sort of the performer inside Donald Trump and the publicist inside Donald Trump, to attach news and developments to big days like the one we're in now, whether it's a holiday or an historical landmark. There's some poetry, I think, involved when he thinks about this stuff.
It's also interesting we're learning from this, first of all, from social media, not from CENTCOM, not from the White House, and that he's deferring statements to himself tomorrow. We're going to have to wait and see.
How true.
All right, coming up, OPEC members are planning to raise production quotes next month, what it means for you and the markets. But first, legendary longtime Caddy for Phil Mickelson, Jim McKee, is here to talk about the upcoming Masters. That is straight ahead on Bloomberg this weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on some of the top stories. And Poly Market, well, they're getting slammed for allowing wagers on the fate of the U.S. airmen that were downed in Iran. Now, since deleted market, the users were able to place bets on when the pilots might be rescued after their fighter jet was shot down in Iran Friday. Both crew members have been rescued. Representative Seth Moulton, he's a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. He served in Iraq. He sounded off on social media, calling it, quote, disgusting. Poly Market replied to the post with an apology. They said they are looking into how this slipped through their internal safeguards. And the war in Iran is forcing Italy to set jet fuel limits at some of its airports. At Venice, authorities said that priority will be given to medical, state, and flights longer than 3 hours. The restrictions are just some of the earliest examples that fuel shortage in Europe is starting to impact operations. And the Artemis astronauts, they're more than halfway to the moon. The 3 Americans, 1 Canadian, they'll reach their destination Monday, performing a lunar flyby and then coming straight back home. There's still a slight issue, though. Their toilet having some issues again. John Honeycutt, he's Artemis Mission Management Chair. He was asked about it during a mission briefing yesterday.
I think the fixation on the toilet is kind of human nature, right? I mean, everybody knows how important that is to us here on Earth, and it's harder to manage in space.
Yeah, got a point there, John. It's been malfunctioning since it took off on Wednesday, and it's kind of been hit or miss both times. But the astronauts, they are dealing with it. Christina and Joe can't make this stuff.
Probably quite a relief that it's working again.
Very good.
Yes. Got it.
So you gotta go. You gotta go.
So many things I'm declining to say on television. We're classy here at Bloomberg. We're not going to get into it. Thank you, Lisa. All right. This year's 90th Masters tournament is going to be like no other in recent memory. For the first time in more than 30 years, 2 of the biggest names in golf won't be present. Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson are going to be absent from the green in Augusta. In addition to those noticeable absences, IBM and the Masters tournament are using AI to give fans a way to experience the game and the course like never before.
Yeah, joining us now is Bones, the famous caddy, Jim Mackay, golf commentator, golf caddy for Phil Mickelson. He was on Mickelson's bag for 25 years, and he's with us on Bloomberg this weekend, along with Jonathan Adashek, Senior Vice President of Marketing and Communications at IBM, coming together for this super cool piece of technology that's essentially an AI-powered immersion experience. Jonathan, tell us about this. It almost seems like you don't have to go to Augusta anymore.
First, it's a thrill to be here with you.
Thank you.
And what we're doing this year in partnership with Augusta, we've been partners for 30 years, is we're bringing the fairway to every fan. Not everybody gets to go to the Masters, and people follow it in different ways. People love to camp out and watch on one hole, or people like to watch their group. And what we're doing is providing new ways to do that. And we're also providing a new historical view. The Masters has had this vault for many years, a video vault that gives footage from the various rounds. This year, you can look at the final round of every tournament since broadcast has been there, over 50 years. And you can use natural language to go find the shot that you want to see. If that was Rory hitting his shot of a lifetime to win his first green jacket last year, or that was Larry Mize in his bump and run, or Jack Nicklaus birdie on 17 in 1986, those are all there very easily with natural language. The other thing we're doing this year is providing Hole Insights. And Hole Insights is giving a new version of probability. The AI is developing probability on what somebody will score based on where that shot lands. So they take the exact coordinates, they marry that against historical data, over 20,000 shots a tournament, and predict whether or not the player will score an eagle or a birdie or a par or bogey or otherwise on the shot.
Bones, I'm wondering how you feel about all this, because you've played this green, you've walked it as a caddy. How many miles do you think, or steps you've walked around Augusta? And then the team at IBM used some of your insights to kind of build out some of these experiences. I'm curious how that went.
It was an incredible honor to team with IBM to do this, and certainly the Masters app, which is powered by IBM, is renowned amongst the players and the caddies out there at Augusta National for being the best app probably in sports. It's
all right.
Don't stop the man.
Excellent talking points. But tell us about how that experience was. How did you partner with them, and how did this work, and how were you able to bring all of your knowledge to this app that we will put out there and agree on is excellent?
Yeah, so it was really cool for me. We were talking about past experiences and things that have gone on in holes over the course of the years, and certainly through their Hole Insights, they've been able to develop over 180,000 past shots for you to basically key in on and see what the historical data has relative to those shots and what you can ultimately expect for the player to do from that point on. But it's been an amazing experience for me, and for someone like me that's walked Augusta National probably close to 200 times. Wow. It's just a real pleasure to bring that experience to everybody else.
Jim, I was just going to ask, how many times do you think you've walked Augusta or played Augusta? 200 times is amazing. To what extent could you bring that experience to bear in this project with IBM?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. Having been around it as much as I have, and certainly I wish I got to play it as much as I've caddied it, and that certainly isn't the case. It's a hard course to get on, as you know. Yeah. But it's been just a wonderful experience, and I have, really taken the context of what we've done over the years, brought it to IBM, and helped them out in terms of creating the Masters app, and ultimately what goes on with Hole Insights, and ultimately the Masters Vault.
Now, Jonathan, you guys used Watson as part of this. Is that the name of the new AI? Watson is a legendary IBM computer. How does that factor in, and what does that computing power get you? Is that who's calculating all those shots and everything else like that?
Watson X is what we're using for this. It's our AI.
Yeah, okay. Today. I didn't realize you guys were calling it Watson X.
Yeah,
I love
Watson
that.
X. It's a reinvention of where we were in the past. And it is bringing that compute power, that AI to the table, and bringing in the insights you get from somebody like Bones. Nobody knows the course like he does, and it's bringing all of the data together to give this new experience for people.
Do you worry at all, though? Golf is so much about getting outside, the grass, the experience, the leisure activity. There's a big discussion right now about sports and betting and quantifying this all to the numbers and percentages. Do you realize it's going to take, are you at all afraid it's going to take any of the spirit out of it, or do you think it's just going to add to the game?
We think it's just going to add to the game. And we think the opportunity for people to get a new experience like this as they're watching a tournament and engaging with a tournament like the Masters is unique. We're going to bring some of it also to Madison Square Park this week with Thursday through Sunday. We're really excited for that, where you're even going to have an opportunity for the first time to, in a simulator, play one of the Augusta holes in Madison Square Park.
Oh, that's fun.
So it's going to be, all these things, I think, just drive more fans and more people to be passionate about the sport and engage and try and play it themselves.
I don't know if everyone's seeing Jonathan's socks and sneakers this morning, but you're very on brand.
I think we get them. The greens are on the grass and
green and yellow.
So
yeah, I had to be a Masters.
I can hear the piano music swelling up right now. You made a reference, I think, to natural language.
Yeah.
That's the AI component that we're talking about here, right?
What you're allowed to do
when it comes to search.
Yeah, you can use natural language search. The AI behind it is looking across as you're looking at the vault. It's using optical character recognition. It's using speech to text. It's using scene recognition.
Fascinating.
So all sorts of AI technology that sits underneath it, but you don't have to know that.
Yeah.
You have to know, I want to see Larry Mize's bump and run.
Yeah.
I want to see Jose Maria Olazábal's shot to win the tournament. I want to see John Rahm. Like, you can just type those things in, and there it is for you.
Great.
Jim, as somebody who clearly loves the game and has loved the game for a very long time, I want you to tell me, who struggles with golf. First of all, I'm just terrible at it. I've tried. I'm a really bad golfer. But it's not a game. It's not a game that's experienced from home a lot. So what is your pitch to someone about why golf is so magical, and how do you think having more ways to experience it with this app is going to help someone like me come around on this game that I do want to like it? I promise, I do.
Well, it's a game for the ages, and the thing about golf that I love is that it takes you places. You know, whether it's ultimately, going to the Masters as a patron potentially, or just going out and playing 9 holes with your spouse one afternoon, and before dark. It's the most special game, and the thing that I found in my 37 years around the sport is who it ultimately you meet through it. It's just a wonderful experience, and certainly I was lucky to get to caddy for 25 years on the PGA Tour, and it took me all around the world, and it's some fabulous experiences, but. It's just absolutely wonderful, and relative to this Masters app, it brings you closer to the game, and that's what it is. Not a lot of people get to ultimately attend the Masters as a patron, but to be able to see every shot virtually as it's played on the app, and keep up with the game, and of course through the Masters Vault search and the whole insights, it brings you closer to what is considered to be the most iconic golf tournament anywhere in the world, and just creates that kind of love for the game that so many of us feel.
As you refer to the relationships that come with the game, Jim, I'd love to hear about the relationship between the caddy and the golfer, and what you experienced in those 25 years with Mickelson and with many others. I'm really fascinated by that partnership and the extent to which you're helping each other. It's not unlike a producer and a broadcaster, Christina. It really revolves around trust. And I think about you in 2010 in the trees with Phil Mickelson on the 13th hole, disagreeing about maybe what strategy to take here. Talk about that push and pull and the trust that you experience with your player.
Yeah, it's such a great question. It's ultimately what's the most important thing that goes on between players and caddies is that trust, as you mentioned. And certainly, it's fascinating to be out there as a caddy with these players, especially at a tournament like the Masters, because ultimately these players are potentially living out their dreams. This is what they've dreamed about since they were a small child, in terms of, ultimately getting to the finish line and putting their arms into that green jacket. So many big decisions are made out there on the golf course between the player and the caddy, and certainly as a caddy you need to be right 99% of the time. And you referenced that shot from the pine straw there in 2010. Certainly when I spoke to Phil initially about it, he just let me know, hey, I'm going for this green and two no matter what you say. This is going to happen. And I pushed back a little bit just to see if he was 80% in or 100% in. Wow. And I realized very quickly it was 100. And so we just basically talked over the yardage, which was 204 yards, and he hit the most, the career-defining shot for him, particularly at the Masters. And it was a wonderful thing to witness, and hopefully a testament to the kind of working relationship we had.
Legendary.
Jonathan, you're an SVP. You make big decisions. Do you have a caddy in your life? Is it important for leaders to have caddies, someone who's going to tell them and fight with them about big decisions?
I've got a great team. I'm really fortunate, and I like to say I like to be the dumbest person in the room. I like to be surrounded by people who are a lot smarter than me, and it allows us to get to a better place as an organization.
Who are you most looking forward to watching this weekend?
I'm just love the tournament, end to end. But what I am excited about is what I know you two are going to do during break. Getting on the app and looking at 2010 at looking at that shot once again through the vault right away to be able to look at the shot.
I'm not going to lie. I am pretty curious. You also said you can camp out at one specific spot and just watch everybody go by.
You can watch every hole. Just say I'm going to watch the 12th or I'm going to watch the 10th. And just watch every player to come through.
I mean, that's pretty cool.
Absolutely amazing. We only have 30 seconds, even less. Jim, who are you watching this weekend knowing who's not going to be there?
I certainly, what I would love to see would be the ultimate, which is the Scheffler-McIlroy showdown. Certainly, Scotty's won the tournament twice before. I'm a big believer in the fact that if you've won the tournament previously, you play with a whole lot less pressure on you.
All right.
Rory, of course, got it done last year, so I'm looking for a big head-to-head battle.
Jim Mackay, Jonathan Adashek, great conversation. Looking forward to the Masters with the help of AI here on Bloomberg this weekend.
We'll be right back.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date with some of the top stories. And President Donald Trump, he has filed an emergency appeal to keep building the White House ballroom. The Trump administration, they have appealed a judge's order to stop construction. They argue that pausing the $400 million project would raise national security risk. Now, it was a motion filed Friday night. Justice Department lawyers said that the planned 90,000 square foot addition to the White House, it's being designed to defend against, quote, hostile attacks via drones, ballistic missiles, bullets, biohazards, and other potential threats to the president. Well, next week, faculty at Harvard, they vote on whether to cap A grades, and students are not happy about it. The proposal, it would cap the number of A's per course, which now comprise more than half of undergraduate grades. It also suggests getting rid of GPA as an internal metric instead of using percentile rank to calculate honors like cum laude recognition. And in sports, the men's NCAA championship game set. We have Michigan taking on UConn on Monday. Michigan last night beat Arizona 91-73, and UConn topped Illinois 71-62 in the women's tournament. South Carolina and UCLA play for the championship game later today. And how is your bracket doing? Let's check brackets for a cause, because Bloomberg's behind it. You have business executives. They have dished in some money, and they're going to their favorite charity at the top of the leaderboard. Let's see. We have Peter Grauer. He is Bloomberg former chairman. Look at that, 144 points. Jeffrey Taupin's Element Capital Management. He's over at 144 points, too. So they're tied up there 1 and 2. So we'll find out what happens when these games finish later on. But it's a good competition, and the money goes to a good cause, too. Over $1 million kind of in there.
Wow. We like that. All right, it's going to be a busy and crucial week for economic data as the impacts of the Iran war spread globally. The Fed is going to release its minutes on Wednesday, followed by the March inflation report is coming out on Friday morning.
We've got a lot to talk about here with Bloomberg Equities reporter Natalia Kinijevic with us in studio here at World Headquarters in New York. Natalia, it's great to see you. Happy Easter, and thanks for spending some time with us. When I look at the S&P 500, I see a broken chart. It's below the 50, it's below the 200-day. Technicals are a big problem as we walk into a new week with so much news. What's going to drive this, fundamentals or technicals, as we try to figure out the next leg?
Thanks for having me, guys. Yes, I think now it's mainly a story driven by technicals. So, for example, it is important to take a look what happened last week. Every week since the beginning of the war, stocks traded at a very, simple pattern. Stocks were up Monday to Wednesday every single week, and they were down Thursday and Friday by about 9% on average every week up until the last one. It just tells us that investors did not want to hold positions going into the weekend, so they wanted to de-risk portfolios. Now, last week, we saw a huge jump in stocks, but of course that happened after we got a headline saying that Iran is working with Oman to kind of manage the Strait of Hormuz. We saw that the S&P 500 rose 3.4%. That's the best performance since late November. But it is really important, guys, to take a look at technicals and positioning. Because going into this last week, we saw that hedge funds accumulated a huge amount of short positions on the S&P 500 just to prevent themselves from bigger losses. And then when we see that stocks are moving up, they have to cover those short positions. So this is a kind of short squeeze rally. And also, again, going back to fundamentals, I want to quote data from Matt Malley. He posted a nice note yesterday. He said, when history tells us that when oil prices jumped by 60% and stay at this level for several weeks, it always leads to a decline of at least 20% in the S&P 500. So maybe we are really far from this like big rally.
Well, and speaking of oil prices, we've got this OPEC meeting going on. Story in the terminal, OPEC members are planning to raise production quotas for May. This is, of course, a symbolic move as this conflict continues in the Middle East, and they're still trying to get those shipments through. We have seen a couple more go through. Iraqi oil tankers were allowed to go through today, but obviously it's not making a big enough difference. Oil prices, of course, climbing to almost $120 a barrel last month, and Brent futures are settling near $109 on Friday. That was after President Trump vowed kind of an escalation in the war, which we've also been talking about.
Yeah, triple digits for Brent, for WTI. You talk about quotas. That's different than pumping. This is a symbolic move that will not actually result in more oil, right?
Exactly. So we see these headlines again, like according to people familiar with the matter, that it would lead to increase about 106,000 barrels. It's just a drop in a bucket. But also we have to keep in mind that it's not just about production. It's about supply chains and transportation. So the market is still very, very tight. And as a result, of course, consumers feel that.
Yeah, so next week we start to have a lot of data coming out. It's a dump. We have CPI, we have PCE, we have Fed minutes coming out. I mean, so much is going to be coming out. What are you keeping more of a closer eye on? Is it the CPI? Is it PCE?
I would say like all of the above. So for example, when we look at CPI numbers and projections, economists expect that monthly CPI, month-over-month data, would result in a 1% increase.
And that's a big deal.
It's a huge one, yeah. So I saw data from Wells Fargo economists. They expect energy inflation is up by 11%. So of course, yes, this is important. When it comes to the FOMC meetings, we will have to keep an eye on what the officials are saying or were saying about growth projections, because now this is a huge debate about inflation versus growth. Because when consumers have to pay more at the pump, or even if you don't have a car, right? It's a farm-to-table economy. Our grocery stores, so they also deliver goods and everything, and it all depends on gasoline prices. So they will have to make choices at some point. If that happens, we will see less consumption, and of course, that is going to have a big impact on the U.S. economic growth. So we will see what the minutes disclose about what officials were saying about these growth projections.
I also want to ask, we asked this of Mike McKee yesterday, but I'm asking you as well. When we see these rallies, it seems like the market is looking for any strand of hope to hold on to. Do you think these peaks are realistic? Do you think they're aspirational? And do you think at some point they're going to stop?
You mean the stop in terms of
well, we see the market rally anytime there's any sign of hope from the president. Anytime the president says something that the market's like, we see that immediately reflective. There doesn't seem to be any check on that, because it seems like they're just looking for reasons to see hopefulness in the rally, to see an end to this conflict. Do you think that's going to continue?
I think many investors want, at least if it's not a resolution, but Goldman Sachs trading desk actually published a nice note last week. They said the market doesn't really need a very clear, doesn't need to wait for a peace deal. They need to see a signal when both sides send the same message. That would be the opportunity for stock pickers, long investors or traders to start buying the dip more aggressively, and that would probably be a good, solid starting point for stocks to move higher on a more sustainable basis. For now, it's just technicals. Traders are trying to navigate the market, cover short positions, etc.
Well, you mentioned the FOMC meeting, so that's taking place later this month. Jay Powell's last time talking. I mean, how focused are people going to be on his words and what he's saying?
I think they will be focused, of course, because, it's always interesting to learn what Jay Powell is saying about the stock market. But of course, the market wants to know what's next for the next Fed chair. It's not going to be an easy job, especially right now. But again, as of now, we see data showing strong U.S. economic growth. We had good payrolls report, much better than expected. So there are no signs that the U.S. economy is in a very bad shape. So it is not an easy job for the Fed right now. And for now, most economists, they don't expect the Fed will cut anytime soon. They will keep an eye on the on the economic growth.
If the Strait reopens, there's an important ultimatum tomorrow night that could be critical for the way forward here for energy prices and for the markets. If there is a sign that the Strait is reopening, does that short squeeze bring the biggest rally yet?
I think we may see more short covering for sure, because it will be a positive signal for the stock market. However, I keep hearing more and more that economists, stock market strategists, they already model oil prices at around $100 per barrel up until the end of this year. I mean, no one knows for sure, but people are pretty pessimistic on energy prices. And as a result, it's going to affect positioning. And all that rally that we saw last year in economically sensitive sectors, it's not going to work right now. I'm talking about materials, industrials, etc. So what works right now is energy, AI, and of course, we are just a couple of weeks away from the earnings season. It's going to be a huge one and very interesting one.
All right, we'll have to have you back. Natalia Knežević. Every time I mess up, we practice in the...
You're doing great.
Knežević.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for coming on, especially Easter weekend. We really appreciate it. All right, coming up, is artificial intelligence helping make your life easier or not? Or are you just managing the AI? We'll expose that question in this weekend's Forecast newsletter. That's coming up right ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend. Stick with us. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Christina Ruffini. The founder and CEO of NVIDIA has called artificial intelligence the single most powerful force of our time. The multi-trillion-dollar industry promises to revolutionize nearly every aspect of our lives. So what about people like me who aren't fully on the AI bandwagon? Bloomberg News senior tech editor Shona Ghosh wrote about that for this weekend's essay in the Forecast newsletter, and Shona joins us now. Thank you so much for taking the time, especially on what is a holiday weekend. Your essay is called "The Era of AI FOMO is Upon Us." FOMO as in fear of missing out. I got to tell you, I have JOMO when it comes to AI. That's the joy of missing out. But are people upset they're not getting on the AI bandwagon?
I think a lot of things are going on at once. One is, we're a few years into ChatGPT. That's the chat bot that was released by OpenAI a few years ago. I think more or less most of us understand what that is. The FOMO aspect comes from the fact that the companies behind AI models like ChatGPT are moving on really, really quickly. They are releasing new models every few months, and it feels like the tech is developing exponentially quicker. It's a much faster evolution pace than we've seen from things like phones, where maybe it'd be an annual or a biannual upgrade. We're talking about sort of months or weeks between releases, and there's lots of releases from lots of different companies. So the FOMO aspect is partly about also feeling like you're just not really on top of this technology that everyone's telling you might take your job, might be really useful, but has severe economic impact. So it's a lot of big statements for something that's very, very hard to keep up with. So I think that's the sort of sentiment that underpins the FOMO element.
But you also write about how it's supposed to save us time and it's supposed to make us more efficient. And you use the anecdote of, I think it's a guy who wrote some sort of program that kind of runs his life and puts all these things, including his taxes and his schedule and his workout schedule, all into some sort of system where it's all optimized, and you're like, am I supposed to be spending my few free hours coding some sort of system to then make those hours more efficient? Am I?
Yeah, I think, certainly for me and us AI skeptics, I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as a full AI skeptic, but this idea that AI should run many aspects of my life is something I feel icky about, for want of a better word.
That's actually a great word.
It's a little icky. It sort of turns us all into coders, potentially, the idea of making your whole life kind of readable to the machine rather than this idiosyncratic, maybe slightly chaotic if you're a parent like me. My life isn't highly systematized. I make decisions on the fly all the time. How do I tell an AI system to run my life? It feels like there's a big barrier to adoption there where, I have to think about my life in a systemic way. I'd have to organize it in a way that makes sense to a machine, and then maybe the machine might do an okay job of, I don't know, sending some emails, sending some messages, booking some appointments. But it feels like there's a big gap there between what my life actually is versus what I might be able to tell an AI agent to do. And the promise is, of course, is that an AI agent can do these boring things for you and save you time. But in reality, does your phone really save you time? I mean, you use it for huge amounts of admin. It means that actually a lot of what we have to do nowadays, booking holidays, finding a date, ordering food,
it's
all of this
exhausting. Yeah.
It's exhausting. We all spend, maybe it does save us time, but the upshot is it's all moved to a single device where we now spend, many hours a day doing our kind of life admin, but also work happens on devices. So you just feel like a growing chunk of your time is spent on a screen. So this idea of spending more of your time telling a screen what to do and how to organize your life just feels like a bridge too far and maybe a little exhausting.
And maybe there's a disconnect between how much companies get out of it and like a value add in our actual personal life, because you write, the creep of digital technology into our lives hasn't demonstrably freed us up for higher or nobler pursuits. We don't create more art because life is easier. Decades after the arrival of email, we just send and receive more of it. The smartphone era has flattened everything, as you just mentioned, into a single screen of constant admin. So how do you balance this? Any advice for people who think they should be participating or people who are panicked and participating too much? How do we handle this?
I think it's important to remember that not everyone needs to be on the cutting edge. I feel particularly exposed to this myself because I am a technology journalist. It's my job to look at some of these tools almost on a daily basis. And, many companies are encouraging employees to experiment with AI tools. So, but you don't have to do everything. You don't have to hand over everything to an AI. Ultimately you're in control over how much you use it. So I think the answer is to set some boundaries and stay a little resilient to some of the hype around it. You don't have to use this in your personal life if you don't want to. I think it's important to keep an open mind, as with all technologies, but, as such, you don't need to be on the front line, getting an agent to organize your personal life. Clearly that works for some people who love spending the time with the technology to make it work for them. Not all of us have to do that as yet, but it is worth keeping an open mind. So I think it's about setting boundaries. And, ultimately, if you don't want to look at a screen, you don't want to look at the AI at this point, you don't have to. And you can go and touch grass and spend time with your family.
Yeah, I'm not great at setting boundaries. I feel like now I've got another boundary I've got to set. But very quickly, we've only got about 30 seconds before I let you go. Have you found AI to be useful in one small way in your life?
I have, which is why I wouldn't say that I am an AI skeptic. I do find it useful for, where I live in London, for recommendations about day trips to visit with. I've got a toddler, and we often are finding ourselves looking for things to do to keep her occupied. And an AI is a useful sort of bulk research tool, like a Google on steroids. So, just in terms of a map of suggestions, a list of suggestions, I have found it quite useful for that in my personal life. But, everyone's mileage varies.
All right, that's a good tip. I just moved to New York. Maybe I will ask it what I should be doing on my Mondays and Tuesdays off. Shona Ghosh, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's a great essay, and you can read more about this story and get a jump start on your week ahead with the Forecast newsletter. Subscribe at Bloomberg.com/newsletters.
Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, breaking news, a successful mission overnight to rescue that missing U.S. serviceman who ejected over Iran. President Trump revealing new details about the life or death mission as the deadline approaches for reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Plus, OPEC meets today to discuss the energy crisis in the Gulf, what can be done to keep oil and gas prices from skyrocketing.
And it's TMZ versus Capitol Hill. As the partial government shutdown drags on, the founder of a celebrity gossip site tells us why he's turning his attention to Washington.
We're showing how the public feels about them. And I think they've lost that big view of it.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from our global headquarters in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm Joe Mathieu in for David Gura. Alongside Lisa Mateo, it is Easter Sunday, April 5th. Thank you for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio, streaming live on YouTube, Bloomberg.com, and of course the Bloomberg Business app.
And we're going to get straight to Lisa for the headlines.
And let's get to that missing airman who has been found safe and sound. That's after Iran downed that fighter jet. And this is all as Iran continues to strike Persian Gulf states. Now, this was in a social media post. President Trump called the service member who had been missing since Friday a brave warrior. He said he sustained injuries, will be just fine. In a separate post, he said a news conference will be held Monday afternoon over at the Oval Office. The New York Times reporting the rescue operation involved hundreds of special operation troops, U.S. aircraft dropping bombs, firing Iranian convoys to keep them away from where the airman was hiding. The publication also added he may have relied on locals who were anti-regime. The other crew member on board the jet was reported to have been saved earlier. Now, this rescue, while it comes as the war enters a sixth week, Tehran continuing to attack its neighbors. Earlier this weekend, President Trump threatened to unleash, quote, all hell on Iran as early as Monday, saying that the 10-day deadline for the country to make a peace deal with the U.S. was running out. The president also warning that if Iran doesn't agree to his terms and open the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping traffic out of the Persian Gulf, the U.S. would bomb the country's civilian energy infrastructure. Now, Iran announced Saturday that Iraq, it's a major oil producer, would be exempt from its shipping restrictions in the Strait and allowing as much as 3 million barrels a day of Iraqi oil cargoes. Well, we go now to the war in Ukraine, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he's ready to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin for negotiations to end the war between their countries.
We are ready to come. I always said that we are ready for the meeting on the level of leaders in any kind of format.
Zelensky made those comments in Istanbul after meeting with Turkey's president. And today is Easter, so yes, Pope Leo XIV celebrating his first Easter vigil at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. It's Leo's first Holy Week as leader of the Roman Catholic Church. Christina and Joe.
Lisa, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa. I know we've got a lot to talk about today, but this Zelensky relationship he's building with GCC countries in an effort to help them strike back against these Iranian attacks with their small, cheap drone technology is really fascinating, and I think it's going to have a long tail end with the policy surrounding that war.
Well, let's see about that, because there's an enormous amount of institutional knowledge that's been gathered in Ukraine over the past couple of years, and it looks like we could use some of it.
Right. Well, certainly the Gulf countries could use it right now, and they're taking full advantage of it. And Zelensky could use some friends and some funding.
Yep,
so let's see where that goes.
So it was just an hour ago, President Trump announced that he will hold a news conference tomorrow. It's going to take place at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. You will hear it and see it live here on Bloomberg TV and radio. This after the second U.S. airman, of course, downed in an F-15 fighter jet, was rescued safely. If you're just joining us on this Easter Sunday morning, we have good news. The president making that announcement shortly after midnight. And it comes now as a new piece from The Atlantic calls this war, quote, a failure of intelligence, but not in the way you think. Writing, quote, the U.S. intelligence community is neither designed nor equipped to restrain a president who is moved by impulse, emotion, and his own feelings. It can only provide him with information. When the president disregards what he is told or distorts it, that failure, they write, is his alone, unquote. Back with us, Bloomberg White House correspondent Jeff Mason. Of course, it's not failure, Jeff, we're talking about this morning. It's a major success for the president, who just 24 hours ago was deeply troubled by the fact that this pilot had not been found. And many asking about whether progress that we had claimed, military progress against Iran, in fact, was real. How does the president spin this to his favor?
Well, I think number one, Joe, he celebrates what is a success of the U.S. military operation in extracting this person who had fallen because of Iran striking down that plane. And that is a major success for him, and no doubt one that he will want to tout. It made me think a little bit about, I mean, it's absolutely not apples for apples, but it made me think a little bit about the Obama years and the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and President Obama making a risky decision to go in after Osama bin Laden, despite the fact that the intelligence wasn't 100%. There was absolutely a risk there. Clearly, there was a risk here too in the rescue operations to get this airman, and it could have gone wrong. It could have gone poorly, and it didn't. So that's something that he will no doubt be celebrating. But to your broader question, there are certainly concerns within Republican circles and within the intelligence world about whether or not the president and the U.S. military were fully prepared for the war that he launched more than 5 weeks ago. And you're seeing some questions about that as a result of the downed airplane, and also some questions about the rhetoric that he and Secretary Hegseth have used about U.S. military supremacy in the air over Iran.
And Jeff, I do want to point out, you sent me a gentle, very polite correction over text message. Next time, just yell at me on air. It's fine. But you were correct. And Joe, you may also yell at me on air. I misspoke when I was thinking the president had gone to Mar-a-Lago this weekend, but he hasn't. He actually stayed in Washington this weekend. He's there.
He did.
Why do you think we're waiting until tomorrow to hear from the commander-in-chief? I would think he would want to get out and be the face of this almost immediately, because all of this messaging, we haven't heard it from CENTCOM. We haven't heard it from the White House. We've heard it from the president on Truth Social for the most part. Why not come to the briefing room?
And they were pretty quiet over the weekend, that's for sure. It's also unusual, Christina. So I understand you're getting that wrong earlier. It is unusual for him to stay at the White House for the weekend. I think in this case he stayed to watch over this operation. Why he's not coming out today is anyone's guess. There's certainly a possibility that they're still, cleaning up or finishing up some of the last bits of this operation in Iran, despite, of course, the president announcing the results of it. I don't know the answer to that. It is Easter. He's celebrating with his family tonight. It's also possible that he, just wants to save this as a big news item for Monday.
Indeed, it's sometimes difficult to get the attention you want on an Easter Sunday when not everyone's glued to the news or all the reporters that you want in town, for that matter. So we move on to tomorrow. Jeff, how's this going to work? It's going to be in the Oval Office, 1 o'clock. The president says he'll be joined by the military, as he puts it. That's the Secretary of Defense, maybe, I'm assuming, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in what could be a wide-ranging conversation. But there's an ultimatum for Iran at the end of the day. Will he reinforce that?
There is an ultimatum, and that's sort of the operative question here, is does he just kind of focus on the success and use that as a catalyst to continue with the 2 to 3 week deadline that he had focused on for concluding the war, or does he follow through on the escalatory language that he also employed last week in that primetime speech on Wednesday night, and reiterated in the Truth Social post about the deadline and the power plants? Good question. TBD. We'll see what he says. I do want to play down a little bit of the press conference piece.
I was going to ask that. This is not a problem exclusive to this administration. The last administration did it too. They would say press conference, news conference, and then not take any questions.
Yeah, I mean, probably President Trump will take questions because he likes to take questions and he takes them pretty frequently. But it is not a press conference in the sense that it's not in the East Room. It's not in the press briefing room. It'll likely just be the press pool that goes in. Surely members of the press pool will shout some questions and probably he'll take some. But he does kind of call any event in front of cameras a press conference. So I like to kind of tamp down that the use of that or the expectations associated with that.
Jeff, quickly before we let you go, we did have this exuberant, very excited tweeting from the president this morning about this rescue. We also had a profanity-laced tweet aimed at Iran and them refusing to reopen the Strait. Do you think that belies a little bit of the president's frustration with his lack of ability to move either Iran or other allies to come take pressure on Iran to open up that Strait?
Oh, absolutely. And it also goes to the contradictions that he has, again, been employing since the very start of this war. Just last week on Tuesday, I was in the Oval Office when he first sort of floated the idea of withdrawing in 2 to 3 weeks. And he said then that a deal wasn't necessary for the United States to go out and that they would just leave the Strait of Hormuz and that it would basically open naturally. Well, all evidence to the contrary, and that led to an increase in oil prices and an increase of, I think, questioning about the plan and the strategy for Iran, and also some criticism that he might be leaving without the Strait being taken care of. So yes, I think that's a reflect. You're seeing that frustration come out in that profanity-laced social media post as well.
All right, Jeff Mason, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us 3 times on this Easter Sunday. All right, a humanitarian crisis is looming in Lebanon, where more than 1.1 million people have been displaced since the U.S. and Israel began their war with Iran. That's according to the United Nations.
We spoke yesterday with the president and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, former UK Foreign Secretary David Miliband. Listen.
Mr. Secretary, I understand you just got back from a trip to Syria and Lebanon. What were your initial impressions? And just kind of give us the lay of the land.
Yes, I was in Beirut, in Damascus, and in Homs this week. And essentially, you see 2 countries which had good 2025s. In Syria, they got rid of a hated regime. In Lebanon, they established a new and credible government. But 2026 and the Iran war threatens to suck them back into a vortex of conflict and destabilization. Lebanon, you mentioned rightly, 1 in 5 of the population now being driven from their homes. A country of just 5 to 6 million people, already 1 million refugees from Syria. So this is a country that's really on the edge, and the scale of need is really monumental. If I just tell you that the poorest citizens in Lebanon are being given about a quarter of what they need to survive as a family of 5 for a month, you can see the kind of pressure, the pressure cooker, in fact, that exists in the country.
There's a fascinating story on the Bloomberg terminal about how Israel's war is pitting a country against itself. David, the ongoing war is driving apart communities because of the rift between Israel and Hezbollah. What can you tell us about that?
That's a really good point, Joe. What I would say is that there are a lot of people angry with almost everyone who is present in the country and on the conflict. So there's a lot of anger towards Hezbollah, which fired rockets at Israel after the killing of the Iranian supreme leader. Obviously, Iran sponsors Hezbollah. So there's anger towards Hezbollah for dragging Lebanon into someone else's war. There's anger, too, towards Israel, which now occupies significant swathes of southern Lebanon. You'll remember that that's happened before, between 1982 and 2000. It was disastrous for Lebanon, disastrous for Israel, too. There's anger towards the government, because people want them to have the government to have more agency, more leadership. And there's enormous anger towards the international community, including the United States, for starting a war just as Lebanon was getting back on its feet, and significantly for cutting the aid budget. Because just as needs are rising, we're having to lay off our own staff in Lebanon. We have 100 International Rescue Committee staff in Lebanon rather than 200. So the most basic humanitarian needs are just not being met.
What is the relationship between the Lebanese population and Hezbollah? I remember I was there at the start of the Syrian war and went into the Bekaa Valley and some of these strongholds. And at the time when you drove around there were big banners of, the Iranian leadership, of IRGC leadership. I don't think those are there anymore. And then earlier this year, you had this kind of striking moment where the Lebanese government kind of officially banned Hezbollah's independent military activities. They spoke out against Hezbollah. Has that had any kind of effect on the governing body and popular sentiment for Hezbollah in that country?
Well, there are different communities in Lebanon, and they have different allegiances.
Of course.
The banners that you saw in the north of the Bekaa Valley, they're still there. There are communities who feel they have no option but to support Hezbollah. That's the Shia communities, because the governments historically and the other communities have not given them enough of a stake in the system. And I think it's very important to recognize that the government that came in last year, determined to make a new offer to all communities in Lebanon. That was the key. It's a government led by Prime Minister, former World Bank official. The system continues to offer different places in the political system to different communities. But you can't say there's one attitude of the Lebanese population to any of these actors. It's a country that has many different denominations, many different factions and elements. And the critical question is whether the center can hold. And what you were pointing to, I think, in your question is that with 1 million Syrians, in the main, the Shia population, pushed into other parts of the country, the great danger is that tension rises again in Christian, in Sunni, in Druze communities.
Interesting. So what happens to these communities in the south that have essentially emptied out. Israel says it plans to seize control of territory south of the Litani River, and we have seen a mass exodus in that area. What will happen to those villages?
Well, that question is exactly what I'm being asked by Lebanese people I met last Wednesday in Beirut. They say to me, I'll tell you, the wife of a baker said, look, we had a bakery on the Lebanon-Israel border. It got bombed in November 2024. We moved to Tyre on the Mediterranean coast. We set up a new bakery. We've now had to leave that again. There's stories over the weekend of Tyre being bombed. And what that lady said to me, she said, look, what is my future? I can't go back, but I can't go forward. She's in a government shelter at the moment. About 15% of the total million people displaced are in government shelters. And when I say shelter, that's an old school. So kids are kicked out of school so that people have got somewhere to live. So that's what I mean by the vortex of conflict and instability. And that woman was saying to me, I don't know if I have a future in Lebanon. And I'm afraid there's no good answer to that question at the moment. The Israeli government have said that, I mean, in a chilling phrase, they've said that some towns are going to be razed in the Gaza style. So obviously that is heard in Lebanon. There's talk of occupation. The emergency coordinator for the United Nations said the danger is that the southern Lebanon gets added to the list of occupied territories. And there's no good answer at the moment. And that's why those of us who know that Lebanon and its stability are an important part of the mosaic of the Middle East, that's why we're worried.
I do also, we want to ask you about Iran more broadly, but first I do also want to ask you about your impressions of Syria, because, I mean, the fact that you were able to go to Damascus and Homs still startles me as someone who covered that war for so long. I mean, I was in field hospitals in Lebanon interviewing people who'd been struck with bullets fleeing homes, mothers, children. I think it's promising that you're able to go there safely, but how is al-Shura, how is that new Syrian government going, especially in light of what's happening in Iran? Do you think this is putting undue pressure on a very nascent government there?
Well, it's a very good point. The government is under extraordinary pressure. When you cross the Jordan-Syria border, the Syrian, by the way, you can hear the air raid sirens on the Jordanian side as you reach the border. When I got to the border, there's a big sign which says, take a selfie here, welcome to the new Syria. So there's a determined attempt by the government to say that there's change in the air. I was there last May, just after 5 months after President Sharar took over. I met clients, but I also had the chance to meet him. He said, I need this to be a Syria for all Syrians, but I need month-by-month progress. And the crisis that they face is between expectations and reality. Expectations are still high, but the reality on the ground is a very slow progress. And the great danger is that the money that was promised for Syria by the Gulf countries is now going to have to be spent in the Gulf on defense, on resilience. And Syrians and the Syrian government are worried about where they fit in, given the pressures that they face. They've got a war in Iran to their east. They've got war in Lebanon to their west. They don't want to get squeezed.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So, David, where does this leave rescue workers, something that you know a lot about, peacekeepers, people who are actually bringing resources to those in need? We saw 2 Indonesian peacekeepers from the UN interim force in Lebanon killed by a roadside bomb last week. 2 others were injured. Could we get to the point where help cannot get to where it's going?
Well, we've already reached that point in some parts of the world. It's never been more dangerous to be a civilian or to be an aid worker. More civilians were killed in conflict in 2025 than soldiers were killed. 100,000 or so civilians were killed, according to independent estimates, and 640 aid workers were killed as well. Now, obviously, that work that is absolutely essential to keep not just body and soul together for people who are in need, but frankly also as a mitigation of destabilization. I mean, if you don't treat humanitarian need, then you store up trouble. And that's the great danger at the moment, because we face this scissors effect, if you like. On the one hand, needs are high and rising, in some ways becoming more complex. At the same time, the aid budget has been more or less halved. I mean, there couldn't have been a worse time to have an Iran war, and there couldn't be a worse time to be cutting the aid budget. And that's something that obviously is of concern to us at the International Rescue Committee. We have thousands of aid workers, locally hired staff across the Middle East, as well as across Africa and South Asia. And what we see is that scissors effect really destabilizing the communities that we're trying to serve.
There's so much conflict going on in the world right now. We were already at a point before these 2 recent conflicts where aid organizations were saying they were reaching not only the extent of what they could do, especially after the departure of USAID, but compassion fatigue even from donors. It is a holiday weekend. People are reflecting and talking about their families. You've been doing this for a while now. What is your best advice to people who feel like there's too much, they can't help, they don't know what to do? How do you fight that compassion fatigue and make a difference?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I've learned is that it's not hope that leads to action, it's action that leads to hope. And I would say to people, visit the IRC website, rescue.org, learn about what's going on, and learn about how, yes, each individual contribution may seem small, but we think we helped about 28 million people last year. That's a hell of an operation. And so this idea that we shouldn't care because there's nothing that can be done, I would turn it around. There's something that can be done, and surely we care enough. The world has more resources to do more good than at any time in human history, and woe betide us if we don't make the most of it.
That's a nice thought. Don't get overwhelmed by not doing something.
Yes.
Do something,
Absolutely.
and then ask.
No, it's good to see him on this Easter Sunday and have a slightly different conversation about what's unfolding in the Middle East.
Exactly right. Well, many of our colleagues might be on vacation. Washington may be in recess for Easter vacation, but the Hill has still been busy on and off. Joining us now for the latest on what's going on is Leslie Shedd. She's at the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center. She's also a former senior Republican staffer and communications officer. And we have, I'm sorry, I've lost my sheet right here.
John McCarthy.
John McCarthy. I'm so sorry, John. Thank you so much. You were a former senior advisor for political engagement under President Biden. I promise we are excited to see both of you. We had very, very long titles that I was trying to cut down in my head, and clearly my brain is not doing any of that today. So I apologize to Joe, and I apologize to you. We do want to start with the news that we've had this morning. Obviously, this was a very risky operation for the president, for the military members involved, but also risky politically. I mean, something not too dissimilar was a huge blow to President Carter's administration when he tried to rescue those Iranian hostages. The helicopters went down, and his administration never really bounced back from that. So, Leslie, I'm going to start with you. Was this risky politically as well as operationally? And what do you think this does for the president's agenda in this war now that this was recovered successfully?
This is a huge victory for the president. I mean, obviously, I would say it's a huge victory as well for the airman, for, his family and friends. But this it really shows you just the might and the power of the United States military, of the U.S. intelligence community. It's a very big win and a huge sigh of relief. The idea that Iran could have gotten their hands on this man and, tortured him, held him hostage, used him in publicity stunts to try to get the United States to stop what they're doing, just would have been really damaging. And I'm just so thrilled this morning. You wake up on Easter Sunday morning to this amazing news. And it is a big, huge congratulations to the president, to the Department of Defense, and like I said, to our intelligence agencies that contributed to this.
Pretty remarkable timing, that is for sure, Leslie. John, we're not out of the woods yet, far from. We've got a massive ultimatum at the end of the day tomorrow. The president has reinforced just in the last 24 hours, threatening to bomb the civilian infrastructure in Iran if the Strait of Hormuz has not reopened. We've got a market that is deeply concerned about what happens next, and oil prices that are rising and could go higher if the Strait stays closed. The political risks are far from over. How does the president handle this in a news conference tomorrow? What questions would you be asking?
I mean, I think you'll find a point of kind of bipartisan agreement with myself and Leslie here that it is a real testament to the United States military that they were able to carry out this operation. And I think that all Americans, of course, are just absolutely thrilled and delighted and so proud of the military operation able to retrieve this airman. But as you point out, yes, the politics of this will remain complicated. I mean, the fact that this situation even occurred in the first place really kind of talks about, the fact that Americans never voted for and are not supportive of the president's activities here in the Middle East. I would take it one step further. Of course, you saw the president's Truth Social statement this morning. Not exactly the language you expect on Easter morning out of a president. There's so much activity online with people even asking, is this real? Was the president's account hacked? Just because it is obviously such kind of, not typical behavior from a U.S. president. But I think that experts kind of across the board are curious about what the president will do next year. And the politics of this will remain very fraught.
I actually sent that tweet to our control room before mentioning it on air, and then Joe pulled it up in the terminal, and only after then did I read it on air because I was afraid that maybe I was looking at the wrong site, even though I generally do know where the president's tweets come from.
He was not hacked, it turns out.
And not happy. Leslie, I also want to ask you about what's been going on in the Hill. I mean, we still have this partial DHS government shutdown. This is a bit of momentum from the president, but it's going to circle back around at some point. This momentum is going to be back to reality, and we're going to have to address the fact that there doesn't seem to be a lot of progress there. Who do you think is going to take the blame for this shutdown, Republicans or Democrats?
It's absolutely Democrats' fault. Look, Republicans have tried repeatedly to try to reopen the government, to fund DHS. Democrats have refused. And it's frustrating. Look, you know, I'm a Republican. I remember times when Republicans would do this too, right? Shutdowns do not work. They have a
But Leslie, there was a deal last
failure.
week that Republicans put together in the Senate that was refused by the House by other Republicans. Isn't this something that needs to be worked out inside the family?
I have to say, I bluntly, I thought that was a mistake. I respect Speaker Johnson. I think that he is, you know, doing the best that he can. I think that he looked around and thought, I don't know that I have the votes for this. And what am I going to do? So what you're really seeing is a vocal minority on both sides, right? Vocal minority Republicans and Democrats that are essentially holding the U.S. government hostage and refusing to fund the government. This has got to stop. I've said this before. I'll say it again. It is a plague on both of our houses. We've got to figure this out. At the end of the day, though, Democrats, they need to cave on this. We've got to move forward. We need to fund DHS. We have to stop having these policy fights when it comes to funding the government. That it's a failure. It never works. Nobody ever gets what they want when they shut the government down.
John, what's your take on that? Shakespearean tragedy or potential opportunity for the Democrats?
I mean, the Republicans do control all branches of government at this point, both houses in the Congress and the White House. So when the American people are thinking of the government writ large right now, they are thinking of Republicans. Democrats have said, if you want our votes, here's what we need to do. You know, Democrats have said that they're open to funding and reopening the government if there were guardrails put on ICE, which there is political support for amongst the American people. So if the Republicans and the majority don't have the votes and they need to get votes from the minority, Democrats have made their terms clear on this.
This all points to reconciliation, Leslie, and I want to just get a sense of what this Christmas tree is going to look like by the time we're done, because it does appear that Republicans are going for it. Reconciliation 2.0. It will include funding potentially for ICE that's not included in the bill that's being managed right now that will basically pay for the rest of the department. But we could see a lot of other things in there. The president wants to see the Save America Act. Some folks want to see an approval for the president's ballroom. Is that what this is going to look like, with a full Christmas tree covered in decorations by the time this is done?
Because Congress is just completely unable to function in a normal way, right? They can't follow the normal procedure. What ends up happening is you get a handful of these must-pass bills, the bills that you know are going to pass, and then everybody just starts hanging every single thing that they possibly can on them. So what the final bill will look like, I think that's going to be, you know, who knows what it will end up look like. But I imagine that there will be a lot of different things on there. The bigger question is, will it get through, right? Like, can it get passed? And with this incredibly thin majority in the House, it's just going to be tough. It's tough on Speaker Johnson and on the whip team. I really hope they can get something done, but we'll see.
John, I want to ask you, because every time I talk to people who self-identify as Democrats, they say they are frustrated that Democrats aren't doing anything. And there's another question I always ask, and we had someone on earlier yesterday that we asked a very pertinent question to. I wanted you to listen to this. And almost every time I have a Democrat on or talk to a Democrat, I ask them two questions. Who is the leader of the Democratic Party? And if you actually take back the House and or the Senate, is there anything you can actually do to stop the legislative agenda of a president who seems not to care whether he has congressional approval for most of the things he does?
Well, let me answer the first thing. You know, look, there's many leaders of the Democratic Party. I happen to be one of them. I'm the chair.
But isn't
of the
that part of the problem?
Yeah, but no, look, this is always the problem for either party when they're out of power, right? The reality is that, you know, the president and the party in power has a much bigger megaphone. That's just always the case. And so we've got great governors out there. We've got great mayors out there. We've got wonderful members of Congress. So there are many leaders.
So, of course, that was Ken Martin, chair of the DNC. But, John, I'm wondering what your answer to that. Who is leader of the party, and can they get in line enough to counter what we just heard from Leslie?
Well, I would say that I agree with the chairman, and I would add a layer to it. Part of the problem that the Democratic Party has right now is that our brand remains underwater. People don't like Trump, but they also don't like Democrats. And part of that is because I think when you rattle off the names that you think of when you think of the Democratic Party, lauded figures from our past, but not necessarily forward-looking. So I do agree with the chairman that I think as the party process for our nominee unfolds, and you start thinking of new names and new faces that are younger and energetic when you think of the Democratic Party, the party will be enhanced by that. When you look to the Congress in this upcoming November, if Democrats were to take back, if you look at Chairman Jeffries, Whip Clark, if you look at the chairman kind of across the individual committees, I mean, these are incredible leaders who I think will really impress the American people. In terms of what they're able to do once they get gavels in their hands, obviously the most kind of marquee issue is going to be what they do with oversight authority. And I think that a lot of Americans who have been very alarmed with the corruption allegations against the Trump administration are very curious to see what Democrats are going to be able to kind of pull out of this and give more truth to the American people on this.
John, I want to ask you about another matter on Capitol Hill that we know is coming now that it's budget season, and that's going to be a supplemental budget request to pay for not only operations in Iran, but the replenishment of munitions that have been spent in this war and in the war in Ukraine. And you've heard, like everyone else, the worst kept secret in Washington is that could be in the area of $200 billion. And Pete Hegseth has allowed openly for that number to be higher. To what extent will Democrats be pressured to vote yes for this, knowing that the president's asking for $1.5 trillion in next year's defense budget, because it will be a vote that's in the name of supporting the troops?
I think the Democrats are going to want to ask the broader question of what else is being funded and how is it being funded, right? You saw the president the other day talk about how we can't have many of these social service programs because we need to support the war. I think that most Americans are not going to be supportive of that posture. You can almost hear the ad makers kind of grinning as they plan to prep those ads for November. And I also think that frontline Republican members kind of, instantly pulled back at that thought because, in a lot of these tough swing districts where you need to bring over independents and Democrats, that posture out of the president is not going to be helpful for the very slim chances of keeping the majority in the House and even in the Senate. So I think that that is not a winning message heading into November at all for the president or the Republican Party.
Leslie, I also want to ask you, the rage underneath that president's tweet this morning is something we've been hearing from him for a while, and that's frustration with European allies, frustration with NATO. He has this interview that he did with a Telegraph newspaper out of the UK where he called the alliance a paper tiger and said he's reconsidering pulling out of the alliance. First of all, he can't technically do it without congressional approval, but he can functionally make the alliance much weaker than it was. And secondly, do you think he will try to do that? Is that something that you think the president will do and other Republicans would support?
I think the president is very frustrated right now, but you're starting to see some actions, right? On Twitter, I've seen the president of Finland, of Austria, saying that they've reached out and spoken with the Iranians. There's been a lot of meetings taking place between European leaders to try to figure out what they can do with regards to the Strait of Hormuz. So I think you are starting to see more of that. I think that countries like Spain and Italy, refusing the U.S. to access their airspace, to use basing, that's just bad. It's not a good look. It only hurts the NATO alliance. Yes, I understand that they're frustrated with him over Greenland and other things, certainly, but two wrongs here don't make a right. I really do think that we all need to sit back down and realize that NATO is one of the most powerful and important alliances in the history of the world. And it makes the United States stronger. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about how strong the U.S. military is and what an important asset it is to NATO and to European countries. But having all of Europe, having all of their skills, their know-how, and now especially as they are rebuilding their defense industrial base, having all of that together, that makes us the most powerful fighting force on the planet. It is incredibly important, and we've got to make sure that we are preserving NATO. And I think that there are strong bipartisan majorities in Congress that will support that too.
John, we got about 15 seconds. I don't know if you have time to respond to that, but I want to give you the chance.
bipartisan agreement on that one. I would just say that I think, many Americans, because of the president and his statements, have kind of called some of this into question, but they do so at our own peril.
All right.
The critical relationship.
We're going to have to leave it there. John and Leslie, thank you so much for joining us. Up next, TMZ, one of the nation's biggest tabloids, is going to Capitol Hill.
This is a fun one.
We'll have an interview with the founder about why they made this little shift in topic that they cover. Stick with us.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Live this weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get you up to date on some of the top stories. And OPEC Plus members, well, they plan to raise their production quotas for May. It comes as a war in Iran constrains output, also shipments from several of the alliance's largest members. Sources say key producers led by Saudi Arabia, Russia have an agreement to increase targets by about 206,000 barrels a day during a video conference taking place today. Now, oil prices climbed to almost $120 a barrel last month, with Brent futures settling near 109 on Friday. The Artemis astronauts more than halfway to the moon. They're expected to reach their destination tomorrow. They'll do that lunar flyby and then come straight back home. On the downside, the toilet acting up again. Judd Freeling, he's Artemis lead flight director. He spoke about it on a mission briefing yesterday.
We tried to vent the wastewater tank that's attached to the toilet. We had problems with that due to suspected blockage, we think probably due to ice.
Who knew ice would be the issue there? All right, let's go over to SpaceX now, and they have some news. And this is coming from Elon Musk on the next test flight of its massive Starship rocket. Elon Musk said the next launch attempt would occur sometime in early to mid-May. In January, he said the new version of Starship would launch early March, and then he later pushed back that date to around April 7th. So now mid-May is the new date. Christina and Joe.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Joe, you've been around D.C. for a while. You've chased lawmakers through hallways and on stakeouts and all those things. Well, now Capitol Hill reporters are going to have new company hunting down those lawmakers, and that is?
Well, it's TMZ, so
100%.
Everyone's going to have to up their game. And it's interesting because Congress members know this. They found it out the hard way a couple of days ago, asked Lindsey Graham, and now others are like mugging for the camera so they can just get it out there first. This is, what are you doing on your recess?
So we interviewed the founder of TMZ about why they've decided to take this new approach. Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. Why did you guys want to do this? This is not something that I normally associate TMZ with, but it seems to be blowing up.
Well, we've been doing politics for years, so it's not anything new to us. Honestly, this was very spontaneous. We were interviewing a TSA agent last week, and she was telling us what she is going through. And it's not just worrying about losing her apartment, not being able to feed her kids, being in food lines, but her mental and physical health were just deteriorating. And to listen to her and then know that these members of Congress were just going to bail and leave town and not fund a bill that would give them something that's life-saving was just enraging. And we spontaneously just said, look, if anybody's watching this who cares enough, send us pictures, send us videos of these members of Congress who are vacationing and living their lives as people like this woman are suffering the way she is. And we got a big response.
That's what I was going to ask you, how the response has been. I mean, I've seen the CODAL, which is the Congressional trip to Scotland. You had a bunch of pictures from that. I saw Cory Booker in LA, Lindsey Graham with a bubble wand in Disney World, Ted Cruz. I mean, you seem to be getting a lot of pictures. Are you paying for these? Are you getting more than you're publishing?
They're giving us, people are giving us pictures. They're mad. I mean, that's the other thing. It's amazing to me how insulated people are, in the Beltway, where they don't seem, I don't think they really understood what they were doing when they did it. I don't think they knew the outrage people felt that they were leaving town.
You mean going on vacation while DHS
because
shut down?
We were calling their offices. When we got a picture, we would call their offices, and they would almost be shocked that, why are people so upset about this? I mean, they just couldn't process it.
Is there any concern that this could backfire and make being a reporter on Capitol Hill even harder. Press access, getting these guys to talk about anything substantive is difficult. We do chase them down hallways frequently. Is there any concern that this will make them hide from us even more?
Okay, so let me tell you something. We are going to increase our presence in D.C. We're going to have full-time people there. And especially in the last week or so, I cannot tell you how many people, in some cases members of Congress, and in other cases their staffs, who have called us and said, this is great. We're going to give you stories. We are excited.
These like policy stories, or is this like dirt on the guy they're fighting with down the hall?
It's not dirt. I mean, look, we're going to do two things, because we've already been doing, this idea of pop culture meeting politics, and we've had, frankly, a lot of success with that. And it's fun. There's no dirt. It's just fun. And we're going to be doing a mix of that with real important stories. And people are actually more willing to give us stories because of this. I mean, this is not just, people on the outside. There are members of Congress who feel they were kind of roped into this recess because they really didn't have a voice, because it was the leadership that made the decision. So don't think that, 535 members are going to scurry away from reporters. In a way, it's the opposite.
I was a D.C. reporter for most of my career, covered the White House, covered State Department, Congress. Part of me thinks exactly what you're thinking. It could use a shakeup. We could use fresh blood. We could always use accountability. The more, the merrier. But part of me is worried about, there's an argument that beat reporting kind of broke Congress, because all these little sound bites and all these little incremental scoops lost sight of the bigger issues, and they made the conversation so myopic that big things can't get done. And I guess I am a little bit concerned about that. Does that worry you at all?
It's funny you say that. I think it's the exact opposite. That what we've noticed is, I think you're right, that they have gotten involved in looking at small things and thinking that that's the story.
Yeah.
And when you look at what we're doing with these photographs and videos, it's really the big thing we're doing, because what we're doing is we're showing how the public feels about them. And I think they've lost that big view of it and started looking at it, the blame game, that the Republicans didn't vote on this or the Democrats didn't do that. And they're not stepping back and looking at Congress as a whole.
Before I let you go, I just want to ask you, you seem so passionate about this, and I'm wondering if this is this a legacy issue for you? Is this something that you want to make part of your brand, or is it just that you got really pissed off and wanted to do something about it in the moment?
Well, first of all, when you ask is it a legacy issue, I think what you're saying is I'm going to die soon, so thanks.
I'm not, and I realized it came out that way, but I was already committed at that point, so I just let my things.
That's okay. I know the reality. I'll be honest with you. 2 years into TMZ, and this was 18 years ago, when we were with Warner Brothers, we were going to launch TMZ DC way back then. Oh, wow. And I went back to Washington numerous times, hired a staff. The night we had our dinner before the next day when we were going to launch, I got a call from Warner Brothers saying, we're killing it, because they just got cold feet and they were scared. And so it's not something we just thought of. This is something, at least for me, that's been in my head for many, many years. And we've covered it kind of, piecemeal. But we're going to jump in now. And yeah, I have a personal passion for it because I've always been into politics. But I also think it's important. And frankly, I also think this is a part of pop culture. And, even before Trump, Obama was a rock star. And, for many years, politicians have kind of captured the imagination of a lot of people in various different ways. John Fetterman is just an interesting figure. So, what is a celebrity? What is somebody who is in the middle of pop culture? That's a very broad thing in this country.
Harvey Levin, founder of TMZ. It was so funny because we've all seen that newsroom. It's so iconic. And yes. When he popped up on my screen, it was like, it was very, but they're mad, and the American people are mad. Well, and this is, if you're watching these numbers online for Twitter, these posts are getting a lot of traction.
Well, and of course, it reminds us that we are witnessing the longest government agency shutdown in the history of America, the Department of Homeland Security. They couldn't get a deal. They went on a 2-week recess. And so, yeah, we're looking for receipts.
Americans want to travel, and they don't want their congressmen on vacation. So up next, A-Rod on business and baseball, plus Yankees opening day. And no matter where you go today, take us with you. Watch us on Bloomberg TV, listen on Bloomberg Radio, stream us live on the Bloomberg Business app. Wherever you are, we're there. It's Bloomberg This Weekend. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. All right, baseball season is in full swing. Get it? Get it? Swing.
I see what you did there.
Here in New York, the Yankees are hoping to sweep the Marlins this afternoon in their home opener of the series.
Yeah, I'm not exactly a Yankees fan.
Okay.
Boston
boy.
Yeah. I just want to be upfront about that.
Fair enough.
But then there's Lisa Mateo. How was the home opener?
And the home opener was fantastic, guys. They're on the today is game 3 of that series. Okay, they're playing the Marlins. I got the advantage. I got to speak to last month Alex Rodriguez, former Yankee. He's also a businessman too. So I talked to him a little bit about baseball, of course, had to talk about the Yankees, but also about where he got some of his best business advice.
I think what Warren Buffett has taught me is, stay in your circle of competence, right? Don't be wide and shallow, go narrow and deep. And what are the 2 or 3 things you do really good that you have a competitive advantage? And then when I was playing, he would say 2 things. Be the best baseball player you can be and be a gentleman, because reputation is everything.
There you go.
Yeah.
Words to remember. So you expanded beyond real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Your portfolio has grown so much.
Mm-hmm.
What do you look for in an opportunity?
Well, the one constant today is change, and things are changing faster than ever. When you look at AI and how it's transforming business, some for the good, some for the bad. But we do 3 things at A-Rod Corp. We do real estate, which is our legacy business. We do sports. We own our 2 franchises in Minnesota, the Timberwolves and the Minnesota Lynx. And then we own part of about 30, 35 companies in which we made investments, most of them minority, some majority. But we look at companies that we have an opportunity to help more than just our capital. Do we have a great passion for it? Do we understand it? And can we actually bring value to the founders? And that's really what we think about it. And obviously we want to buy at the right price and buy really good businesses.
Now, you've had so much success, but you've also had some setbacks, and you've been very open about it. Your docuseries, Alex versus A-Rod, incredible series. You really opened up in there. Even maybe there were some business transactions that didn't go quite the way you wanted. How do you handle those setbacks, or what lessons have you learned from them?
Well, I think, look, when I just turned 50, right? And when you've been around a while, you... hindsight's always easier to go back and go, oh, I wish I didn't make that decision or that decision. But I think you have to lead with it. And, my mistakes, whether it's been in baseball or anything else, where I used to be ashamed of it, now I've had a great opportunity to turn the lens inward, do a tremendous amount of work over the last 10 or 15 years, and I lead with it now. And I just lay all the cards on the table. But learning from your mistakes and then being able to play offense in the future, it's worked well for me.
Excellent. Yankees opening day around the corner. What does this current team have? Does it have the DNA to be a championship team, or maybe what are they missing?
Well, I think they're going to get some health back. Garrett Cole coming back is huge. It comes down to a few things. It comes down to great pitching, good defense, situational hitting. Obviously, the Aaron Judge elephant in the room is he's 34. So that window starts closing at some point. So if you're the Yankees and you're the fan base, you want to capitalize on one of the greatest players of our generation to be able to collect a world title. And the key is, as you get to October and right before the playoffs, is I call it the 2 H's. You want to be healthy and you want to be hot. And hopefully they can do that this year.
What do you think about robot umpires entering the season this year? What's your take on it? How is it going to change the game?
You can make an argument that can make it better, right? But I'm a big proponent for umpires. I think umpires are, in many ways, they're underpaid, they're underutilized, and underappreciated. If you think about an umpire or referee in sports, you have 9 players from each team screaming at you. You have both managers. You have 2 catchers that are not happy. You have hitters that are not happy. But at the end of the day, when you have some of the great umpires that I've been around and I've been fortunate to work with, and I can think of over a dozen of them, they make the game better. They control the pace of the game. They're a big part of the game, and I just think we can't really forget how important they are, because it's still a human game played by humans.
Yeah, they get a bad rap.
I think so, and they're very, very good. I mean, if you think about an umpire who may have to call 300 balls and strikes, and you miss 5, they're going to scream at you for 50, right? So I'm a big believer in umpires. I'm a little bit old school there.
Okay, and I have to talk about the deal. Jason Kelly, your partner in this.
Yeah.
What can we expect for the next season?
Jason Kelly has been a dream partner. He's a great quarterback. I call him Tom Brady.
Nice.
And we have a lot of fun. We have some incredible guests. And now we're having really, really prominent people calling us to say, hey, can we go get on the deal? Which is really exciting for us.
Have you learned anything from this show, business-wise?
Oh, I've learned so much. I mean, really it's a masterclass. When you see the type of people, both men and women, from all walks of life, from all walks of fields of business and sports, they just give you some incredible gems, some great nuggets. And if you're young entrepreneurs, must watch TV, because you can learn so much in a matter of 30 or 45 minutes.
He's talking about The Deal with Jason Kelly. Fantastic. Wherever you get
talk.
your podcast. Great show, too. But that was, for me, as a Yankee fan, just sitting there. I was trying to hold my composure. Did I do okay? Did I do okay?
Be professional, be professional.
And to go on to that massive home opener, pretty cool, which you were there for.
I
Did you hear the
did.
story about Aaron Judge the night before the home opener? He texted his teammates late at night, Thursday night.
Okay.
And it said, tomorrow, suits. They all showed up wearing suits in time for the game. A couple of hours later, he's up there with that 2-run homer right out of the box.
Yes.
And of course, rallied to have
Are
a
they
pretty
going to
great
have to wear
game.
suits now the rest of the season?
Well,
It's gonna be a
gosh,
thing?
yeah, I think there might be something going on there. Absolutely. Your family looks like they didn't
Look
need
how
suits.
cute you guys are.
But we walked in, and it was just as Judge was like hitting that home run.
Good
So it was
job.
a perfect like 2-run homer. It's just great, like a great family time. It's getting a little more expensive year after year, but but it's a good time. It is really a good time. Yes.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Joe Mathieu, for joining us.
Thanks for
Thank
having me, guys.
you for
Happy
watching
Easter.
us. Happy Easter on Bloomberg this weekend. The Michelle Hussein Show starts right now for our TV viewers. Happy Easter, everyone.